Alright, folks. Welcome back, everyone. 皆さん、おかえりなさい。今日は約70日目です。It is day 170. Alright, quick day today. We got 11 grammar points. Straight as quickly to some gaming in the evening as possible. Had a bunch of fun yesterday. New Dave the Diver DLC. Alright, let's see. その頃、私の父は、父は、we're gonna, it's rise, so just go with, 昇進したので、昇進. Dang it, it was either 今日 or 昇. Yeah, 昇 rise. 昇進したので、nearly every week. 出張し始めた。This is the thing where you take the I think my shoe works, right? My shoe のように。
その頃、私の父は昇進したので、毎週のように出張をし始めた。
Okay. 去年300日ね日300日以上トレーニングができた。
去年300日以上トレーニングができた。
彼女は several no probably no 言語をアジア no ペラペラ which is fluent ペラペラ話せるようになった。話せるように。several with a no. So something like a unit. So we use mole? No, there's no counter. We use nani? Like just nanika? Means something we're looking for. I mean just nani? Nine? Okay. That needs a counter. That's the problem. The counter. So what is several? What, maybe quite a few, like kunai. Shinakunai. Shinakunai can mean several, but usually used to emphasize that there's a significant amount of something. We're looking for grammar tone that express an uncertain amount. Oh, it's like nanika, but nanika means something. Be like nanka is often an interjection. Okay, I was just making up stuff now. What other several? And it comes after a no. File. Didn't realize I have so many. Be like, oh no. Not. That's others. Honestly, out of those, I have no idea. I'm guessing it has something to do with ka, maybe. Oh, it could be. So igai? No, with exception. Among, within. I feel like it's something that deals with non, but oh, it could be ikutsu? Ikutsuka?
彼女はいくつかの言語をペラペラ話せるようになった。
That's a tough one. So I think this belongs to all this belongs to all of the things. This removes the need for counter, ikutsuka. Yeah, okay. So I wrote nanika because I have no idea what the counter is. But you could use ikutsuka. It doesn't require a counter. That's going to be a tough one. For several.
とうとう真面目に日本語を勉強する。
先生がまで so up to the point. So this is up to a point of finishing. I mean, she works, right? Oh yeah, I need to finish it.
先生が話し終わるまでよく聞いてください。
Yeah, finish speaking. Which takes the stem and add owaru. There's also the last few examples ago using hajimeru. Okay. As the antonym. So also boku. 遅れてすみません。家をもっと早く leave. Regret. Past. So regret with should, right? Maybe like should as a result. Or have left. This would be in the past tense. There are past tense with should. It's like a consequence, something that you don't want. Maybe the tense. Try. I'm pretty sure you do ba and you do the ba thing and then yokatta. So how does the ba thing work with deru? I don't know how to be dereba? Yokatta.
遅れてすみません。家をもっと早く出ればよかったです。
Okay. これから、これから rapidly これからどんどん寒くなるから暖かい服を買わなくていけない。買わなくてはいけない。
これからどんどん寒くなるから暖かい服を買わなくてはいけない。
服を買って、お、おば、お祖母、お、grandmother? おばあさん、いや、おばあさんに待つ。going to hold and go? Like, I guess we're using iku here, right? Going to go, like, take, right? So, not take. What? Oh, it's mo. What am I doing? Not take.
服を買っておばあさんに持っていく。
Ma is to hold on. Yeah. ニュースではずっと雨が降ると言っていたけど、has come to be clear. Like 降るSo that wait. 晴れる probably. So 晴れて oh no, past tense. 晴れて晴れてきた。
ニュースではずっと雨が降ると言っていたけど晴れてきた。
晴れてきた。What's that? 論説食料what is that? 不足不足食料不足が始まったのはthat's cause, right? 気候変動How does this work? Oh, it's climate change. I see the change. I guess that's climate phenomenon. No, and then tame. there are a couple elements in here that I don't understand yet. Generally considered. Well, there are a lot of considers. Which one? I'm guessing this is the general one. So sarete
論説。食料不足が始まったのは気候変動のためとされている。
ため。I click on this? I can't. Alright, well. Perhaps another day. Oh no, ideaは面白いですが、リスクも高い。Pretty sure it's ですが。More casual? It says literary. だが。
このアイデアは面白い。だが、リスクも高い。
リスクも高い。Interesting. リスク。Level 54. Hot diggity dog. Alright. We're trying to keep these short. Do we have a cram? I think tomorrow we have a cram day. Cram day for grammar. Yesterday when I was playing Dave the Diver in the jungle DLC, someone came by and talked about the Bunpro thing, and they asked what my thought process was when I was going between vocabulary and grammar. Just to clarify a little bit, I'm not going between grammar and vocabulary. I think the lessons, we're doing the 2 months, right? 2 months and study months. So all the lessons are being done on vocabulary and grammar spread out across 2 months in order to alleviate oversaturation of input. And in practice, originally the plan was to practice both grammar and vocabulary on practice month. So today, this month is the practice month. And it's very dependent on how much activity I have. Vocabulary is ultimately one of where the main, the person asked for my thought process behind it. That's the day 1, and then the day 100 video. The day 100 video pretty much explains the N4 block. However, the underlying thought process, usually people don't ask me for thought process in the sense of they would stay there for long enough to hear the thought process. If I had to summarize upon reflection from yesterday, the TLDR for the thought process is that you need context first. So the quick context is I'm using Bunpro after 2 years of Japanese study, 2 years with varying types of Japanese input, right? So you have to keep that in mind. And then the hot take for me, or the TLDR, is that the thought process is whenever now I'm practicing, it has to go beyond what I have done. So SRS, despite Bunpro having SRS, I said this to the guy really early on. I'm not here to review things in the way that I feel people review things. If they're asking me for my thought process, they have to be familiar with what my background is, right? So for Bunpro, I don't use the SRS all that much anymore. So this is what happens when even someone I know for a while comes in and they say oh wow, 2,163 reviews. That number hasn't changed. I'm using Bunpro as a reference source, so a way to integrate higher. So vocabulary is, oops, I clicked on it, sorry. Vocabulary is largely optional in the sense that I no longer engage in vocabulary and the way SRS would do for a beginner. Like, what I mean is I'm not engaging in vocabulary in the way that would be what a beginner would want to do. Basically, they want to create foundations of vocabulary where you have to sit down, memorize some stuff so that you can have a basis for things. So we're beyond that stage. So the 5-minute TLDR is that anything after this stage, when we go to learn vocabulary or when I go to do vocabulary, it has to be more than memorization. We're doing more than memorization. Whether I forget some of the vocabulary, that is forgetting due to memorization. That's perfectly fine. Like, sometimes I forget some words. Like today I read, I couldn't figure out if it was shawl, right? Shawl for rise, or kyo. Those things are due to memory weakness, like memorization weakness, and that's wanikani, a year of wanikani, and we're about to end wanikani for the stuff. That's good enough to form the basis for the foundational memories, like did I forget? Did I memorize this? And even then, I didn't rely solely on memorization. Mnemonics was a play in it. So right now, the time that I have, we're focusing on grammar, and every time we do grammar, we're reading the sentences, we're seeing if there are parts that are weak in the sentence, negotiating all the things that mean similar things. So today I got stuck on several, right? Several has multiple ways of expressing several. So I'm trying to deconstruct and observe, okay, is there any way I can tell which several it is? And we're collecting information. It's no longer memorizing a grammar point. So I don't memorize grammar points because way in the first year during Duolingo, I read grammar points for Duolingo. It's not the same as someone who would sit there and say, oh, the product I'm using doesn't have grammar or it doesn't explain grammar. I don't sit there and idly think, well, what's not there, that means it's not my responsibility, it's not my problem. The idea is when you're learning grammar, it has to go beyond that too. So the concepts have to keep growing. If I'm sitting here thinking, but that's the dangers of thinking about a thought process without context, right? It takes me multiple hours to make sure that I get it across that it is very dependent on what stage you are in learning. However, the bottom line is, after you do something and you acquire the foundations are often memory dependent. So like, you know it face value. It's either you know it or you don't. So you can use SRS and repetition to help memorize things. And immediately to solidify and start to work towards comprehension. Again, memorization is not comprehension. Like, no stretch of the imagination. Memorization and comprehension is necessary for learning and retention. So once you memorize something, depending on your stage, you move on. So like, you can matriculate all the things you memorize while still memorizing new things. So that's what I'm trying to do. Basically, as you're remembering things, as a beginner, right, like when you're starting, you have no basis, no foundation. So almost 90% or more of it is memorization, if that's how you want to treat it. Usually I go a little bit lower, like 60-40, because I would incorporate my own memories. That's what the mnemonics are, like 40% of it's mnemonics. So you can feel like everything's new, So you straight up just try to blitz your brain with like 80 to 90% base value. You're just memorizing it. Immediately after that, the 90 that you're starting to learn can immediately go and transfer into a comprehension task. So as you're learning new things, they can move on to comprehension tasks. Play a video game, read a book. That's where you develop comprehension from the things you memorize. That leads to learning comprehension. That's part of, right? Comprehension, that's part of learning. And through that activity creates retention. Now, while you're doing that, you can still continue to use SRS to acquire the new things that you are memorizing. So you can continue that cycle. Now, most, in my opinion, that are successful language learning, they would say it's a mix of both, right? Like you do all the tasks eventually. You want to have something that introduces a memory task. Memory tasks are low effort. They're incredibly low effort and they're tenuous. So short-term memory at most. I think one of the misnomers about SRS is that SRS somehow creates long-term memory retention. I think that's overselling SRS. It creates maintenance of short-term memory, in my opinion. And when I mean the short term, I mean a year max. Like some people might say, oh, a year, that's a really long time. Not if you lived like 90 years long. Okay? So the idea is SRS is trying to extend short-term memory as long as possible. So you're spacing out and you're going to say, okay, well, how do you test your short-term memory? Try to memorize something and wait the longest period before you forget it, right? And then SRS is supposed to calculate that or try to adapt to that. How far can your short-term memory or your low encoding, low effort memory can extend? I'm impressed that people can memorize something and space it out for a year. I'm almost nearly guaranteed to forget it to some extent. Like some part of it's gonna be forgotten, like how the character looks, like a couple strokes get dropped here and whatnot, based solely on memorization. That is, in my opinion, the weakness, or not really the weakness, but more like the limitations of memorization. Memorization does not lead to long-term retention, and it does not contribute to long-term comprehension or increased comprehension. Comprehension and retention are necessary for learning, like permanence learning, right? And even then, you can forget things when you learn through all of this, right? There's still a chance of forgetting long-term, and that is probably the longer version of the thought process. The bottom line is the mechanical thought process, the thing that maybe someone will hear is that when you memorize something, you're going to have to comprehend it eventually. And you can comprehend it through tasks, like thinking tasks, challenging tasks, deduction, things that create deduction, curiosity. Those things will create new ways to tether the memorized fact or the memorized thing to your existing body of knowledge, your associated behaviors. So like whenever you speak, the target language becomes attached to your speaking. That's through the outputs, comprehension. Deduction is a form of output, right? You integrate information and then you output something through that integration. So for me, I couldn't have said all of that in maybe like 10 minutes or something. In fact, it will require to understand that there is a context to this. I have no interest personally of using Bunpro strictly as a 80% memorization tool. So I'm not here to counter argue or tell other people how to do things, but I don't want to sit here and tell myself, did I memorize this or did I not? which is oftentimes one of the I can't get out of beginner stage situation. Like if you want to talk about beginner stages or intermediate and advanced, I've mentioned this in the 100-day video on Bunpro. I would very conservatively, it's conservative now that I'm considered a intermediate target language learner, as in I engage in activities that are not based on memorization only. I have a point of reference for everything now. So I have a point of reference for grammar, point of reference for every single vocabulary entry, and they may or may not create interference, which is a bad thing that people talk about all the time. Like, what if you get this confused with this? An intermediate learner has to incorporate comprehension. So that deals with analytical skills, comparative analyses, right? Similarities, differences, looking at parallelisms and relationships between things. So that is your next level. That is the level of comprehension. Memorization requires zero comprehension. Like, you can go as low as zero comprehension. I'm not saying that memorization cannot lead to comprehension. It is part of the process to get to comprehension. So sometimes on a low level, you could memorize something and you get a spark of inspiration. That inspiration is comprehension. You've noticed a pattern. You noticed an association from memorization. So memorization is simply you reproduce the thing you remembered. Zero comprehension. So I wanted to make that sort of clear, but it's kind of asynchronous. I'm getting a little bit better at inculcating or like trying to be a little bit more concise about these things. When you feel like you have enough basis, so when you learn something in the future in your target language, you read a grammar point and you have a lot to say about it. You have a lot to think about. Every single vocabulary that comes up makes you think, oh, I could say it here, or I could use it in this situation, and then you're thinking in the target language while learning a new vocabulary word. That's comprehension. You're thinking of a word in order to think about what you can use and how it would be used, and you challenge that curiosity to go find sentences and stuff that's involved. So whenever I learn a new vocabulary, I'm thinking, so maybe next time when I'm in this situation, could I phrase it like this or phrase it like that? That is what I'm doing now. And it takes a whole heck of a lot more time than your incredibly beginner. It's not a bad thing, right? Beginner, you have to start somewhere. When you're a beginner, you're trying to remember and memorize as much as possible. And then hopefully using that memory, you can find context in a foreign world, in an abstract world, to create new associations. So everything is kind of treated as new. I disagree technically. Like, I disagree. Again, it's like 60-40 because English is my tether. So I leverage all of my English to tether it down before all of it becomes Japanese. So now most of my Japanese stuff are thrown in the context of Japanese. Grammar still isn't, because I can't explain grammar in Japanese. The complexity of using the language that is used in Bunpro in English to explain Japanese is still well beyond my vocabulary, right? The context of my vocabulary. So I'm still using English to tether down. Now, a lot of individuals who says, oh, Japanese is just a different thing, so I'm going to blank out and space out my mind until I have a foundation. That's where SRS comes in really handy, because it will measure and push, or attempt to push anyways, push your straight up raw memory skills. And you only do straight up raw memory skills if you believe you have nothing to contribute to learning another language. That is, and it can go from 0, right, to like 100%. Like, so usually, right, 0 to 100%. Most people are here, I think, where they think that their existing body of knowledge in their head contributes maybe less than 20%. So this is where SRS works really well, because SRS will try to maximize how much memorization you can ingest with the highest efficiency. So how little time basically you can get to memorizing something. And when it gets close to 0, it means the only thing you're doing is memorizing. Eventually, you'll memorize enough things where memorization will go down and comprehension will go up. In terms of reliance. So when does that happen? When you pick up a book, right? When you watch a podcast. And here's the irony in all this. In the beginning, the 100% near 100% memorization is because of this, in my opinion, is that the person has nothing to contribute to learning a target language. Like, Japanese is completely foreign. I should just learn like a child with no memories, no strategies, no logical understanding of one's own habit, no native language input, no translation, no interest or curiosity. You strap down and you look at the kana charts and you keep staring at it until you memorized it. In the short term, that will work, right? You can do it for 2 weeks straight and you get it out of the way. And I would like to say that's pretty impressive, because most people's short-term memories, they keep telling me they forget something in like 10 minutes or 5 minutes. And yet when they bolt through them, somehow they expect themselves to remember something through pure memory for like over 6 months to a year. I actually do agree with people that short-term memory kind of just sucks in general. So I have a huge maintenance window for my anything that still sits in memory. So in memorization stage, like vocabulary, a lot of vocabulary is in memorization stage. So at some point, as months pass, they're going to fade. They're going to forget. The idea is you have to memorize something temporarily so you can comprehend it, in order to make sure, at least in my opinion, that you feel you gain value from things you've memorized. The value is recognized when they are comprehended, right? When they're comprehended, and that comprehension comes from application and emergence. So if you're not doing something with the information you're memorizing, they are most likely going to be forgotten. And the consequence of that consistent forgetfulness is a feeling of you're wasting time. You waste time because the only lack of value you get is its memorization. Value creates comprehension and retention. So if you're not using the information you're blatantly memorizing and expecting to continue to memorize it and also maintain it, then that volume is going to balloon to feeling like you're basically investing your entire days just memorizing things. And that's usually in my opinion, one of the quote unquote, most people would call this one of the traps, the complacency of SRS. It instills a habit in which you think that memorization leads to comprehension. It is part of the path to comprehension. So you can make an argument that it does lead to comprehension. It takes a conscious effort to do that, though, not a low effort, temporary way of saying, oh, I'm doing something and therefore it's going to stay with me for the rest of your life. It does, if you keep doing it. That's the problem. Like, do you feel like you're gonna sit here and use Bunpro for the rest of your life? Do you think you want to go through flashcards for the rest of your life? If you do, then that's perfectly fine. Like, if you're happy to constantly do Anki and upkeep it for the rest of your life, that's a hobby, right? That's what a hobby is. If you swim, you can swim for maintenance, or you can swim for improvement, comprehension, growth, application. There are other ways to make swimming more valuable. SRS is often, once the exposure is done, it is maintenance. So right now, what I'm doing is maintenance. It's no longer lessons. So when that person asked me why I alternate vocabulary and grammar, I didn't. I went through the lessons to gather as much information as I can, and then I leave a month for maintenance. I want to check out the maintenance. Now, during maintenance, I'm using my deduction to see if I can see any gaps. So gaps, mistakes, comparative analyses, antonyms, relationships, those are not in Bunpro. Most of those times when I'm looking and arguing, if they were in Bunpro, I could read about it, and that's not the case. Like how I would orient the different severals and whatnot, those are new information. So even during maintenance, I try to infuse, maybe like it's 60% maintenance, or basically memory, and I try to observe, deduce things, and that's what I'm using Bunpro now for. So it's been like that for a while. And what are these deductions and integrations? Anything I learned from Wanikani provides another reference material. Wanikani is now my reference material. So whatever I learned in Wanikani is being reapplied, used again, and changed when I'm using Bunpro. That allows me to retain Wanikani's value that I've used, whatever is important, right? Whatever that I can use while maintaining Bunpro. So now I have a use case for what I remember in Wanikani. Wanikani still provided mnemonics and stuff. So all the stuff that I actually memorized in Wanikani will now have an application in Bunpro. That's how I'm creating new comprehension of the product. So when someone asks me, again, what my thought process is, we have to keep in mind that the key word here is process. So it would require that the person understands where I am in the process. I am not using Bunpro without any foundations. I have used Wanikani, which will end in less than a week from now, and I have used over a year of Duolingo, and again, process matters. So when I say Wanikani and Duolingo, it is what I did while using Duolingo and Wanikani, and I try my best to cover that, what I used while using Duolingo and Wanikani. It's not what Duolingo does and Wanikani does. It's usually never 100%. 100% to me is incredibly naive, uneducated, in my opinion, and those are the accurate words. When you are uneducated in something, everything feels new. When you are naive, thinking that you know nothing, and somehow when you start to learn something, you don't need to learn it, comprehend it, that's naivety. Basically, if you think you can memorize 100% of Japanese, it will magically turn into comprehension. that is being naive, right? And remembering 100% of something is naive too, because memory doesn't work that way. There's no human theory or neurobiological theory that would suggest memorization is the biggest asset to learning and comprehension. Memory is the first step. Like memorization, the act of memorizing things is one of the first steps to forming foundation and step to comprehension, right? So we have to keep this in mind. So I couldn't say all of this when I tried to say all of this when I was playing Dave the Diver. You have to encourage yourself. So the TLDR about the process, as opposed to my thought process, is you have to encourage yourself to, once you memorize something, look around, place yourself in an environment that allows you to either spontaneously be inspired to use something you're trying to memorize, or you're using your education, as in you're an educated person, you're an adult, you have a lot of experiences, you use that to incentivize and place yourself in environments of creativity, comparative analyses, information organizing. Whatever your habits are, it requires you to convert whatever your memorization skills are holding on to into long-term memory. So if you sit here and think that you'll memorize 2000 kanji and then think, okay, once you see the 2000 kanji for a short period of time and you're like, I'm never going to have to come back to this to maintain it, naivety and being uneducated. You're uneducated and naive if you think that's the case, because someone who says that has not developed comprehension. When you start developing comprehension, rarely will a human being say, oh yeah, you just need to memorize everything in order to use it properly. Comprehension like fights off that kind of statement. So whenever someone says, hey, the fastest way to learn Japanese is by SRS and just drilling your 2000 kanji, that is coming from someone who does not comprehend at a higher level beyond memorization, in my opinion. Or someone who is clearly selling you something that focuses on a beginner step, as in the first step. And that will get you into a gateway thing for them to sell you the second item, which is the comprehension item, or whatever book they're selling, or whatever story or podcast they're selling, or easy listening to their own life and their vlog stuff. That is comprehension level, when you're starting to form parasocial relationships and the use case for your memorization. Otherwise, you have to maintain things, because comprehension is a form of maintenance, right? Every time you're reading a manga, it is through comprehension that you are also maintaining the thing you're trying to remember. So that is the bottom line in all of this thought process. If you think that you can one and done something, like, I'm done with this, so I should know all this, that is denial, in my opinion. That is biologically, neurologically, psychologically, maybe even philosophically inaccurate. So whenever I think about these like SRS things, right? They have these little numbers and they have these little states and these tiers. That is to help you keep track of how long you have done something. That does not tell you it's permanent. None of this stuff is permanent. That's not how memory works, period. Like, unless in the future human genetics and biological circumstances change, I won't be alive to see that, right? When you memorize something at the lowest level, it will leave when you don't maintain it, right? If you do not consistently integrate it back, maybe you can stretch it out to 6 months. SRS tends to indicate, right? If you data mine SRS, it's to indicate, it seems like memory alone could get you like 3 to 6 months, possibly. And that's what I call short-term memory, 3 to 6 months. We're not talking about like the 1-to-1, if you're paying attention, short-term memory. Because oftentimes when someone says, well, my short-term memory is terrible, I saw something 5 minutes ago and I forgot it, that's, in my opinion, that's more not paying attention. Because there are rarely few humans that do not have short-term memories longer than that. You would have to be, unfortunately, mentally disabled to have that. Like, what I'm saying is, ask yourself, you had a negative experience, right? How long do you remember that negative experience? So like, we're talking about the capacity for short-term memory. There are very few humans in this world, when something negative happens, there would be like, oh, I only remembered for 5 minutes and now I've forgotten it. So it's about paying attention, like the encoding process. So don't give, I'm very vigorous about this. Whenever someone keeps saying, oh, I just have bad short-term memory, so SRS helps me somehow magically unlock my short-term memory path by spacing out the stuff. No, you had that. When you have trauma, you'll remember it for a very long time, regardless of its existing stimuli, right? The trauma gets triggered over and over again. So SRS can kind of teach you where is the minimum stimuli you can get, and it's pretty impressive, honestly. Wanikani has a 6-month period. Bunpro, I have no idea because I haven't gone here yet. I think it's a 6-month period. I think there's a description somewhere. There was a description. So, oh yeah, here it is. So 6 months. Yeah, so you can extend to 6 months with, I'm guessing it's like 3 each. So like with 3, 6, 9, 12 exposures, 12 repeat, including the initial one, so the 15. In 6 months, you can stretch the duration to 6 months. That's crazy. That to me is called short-term memory, because you are only exposed to that concept. Ideally, what this is saying is you're only exposed, your only source of exposure is this tool, and somehow you can space it out to 6 months immediately by seeing it 15 times. That's, roughly 15 times. We'll round it up to 20 times. That's crazy. That's crazy long short-term memory. That's what I call short-term memory. Long-term memory is when you have the trigger consistently built into your habit, into your comprehension. So when you start speaking Japanese and you start conversing with somebody, everything that you have said, you are outputting and also being re-exposed. So the timer starts over. The timer resets. When someone asks you to go read a book after you use Wanikani, every word or Japanese word you read in that book resets the timer for the maintenance of that word, character, or concept. So technically, when you're talking about short-term memory, when people say something like, oh, it's easier to remember if I go and speak Japanese, it's easier to remember if I go to Japan, your short-term memory didn't change, in my opinion. You're not like training your short-term memory to get better or something like that. You're actually maintaining it a lot more frequently because you're getting repeated exposures. So this program is not exclusive of everything you do, which I really feel needs to be emphasized over and over again. When someone says the things you track, right, are accurate reflections of what you've done, it has to actually track all your activities. It's kind of like someone who goes on a diet and says, I don't use a calorie tracker. Or I go on a diet, I use a calorie tracker, but they only track the meals that they want to track. That's the tracker's effectively useful in the way that you understand this is the calories you want to track, and then all the calories you don't want to track, they aren't involved, they aren't accounted for. Language learning is very similar to this. I genuinely get very alarmed and concerned about how naive and uneducated people are about data, because they don't measure things and know the limitations, the advantages, disadvantages of the things they're tracking. When you're using Manikani and then you go and read a manga, though all those things will circumvent Wanikani. So like if you're using this tracking device, right? Like for example, this tracking device, and someone asked me, so what's my thought process behind Bunpro? Like, why do you not just follow Bunpro's SRS? It's because I don't only use Bunpro. Like, this is not the only place for the exposure. So all this tracking, all this like SRS stuff, it's not telling me anything more. Like, it's rarely telling me anything more, because I see these vocabulary words like in various contexts over and over again. So it hasn't been 3 months since I've seen some of this vocabulary. It hasn't been 6 months, 12 years. It's no longer true anymore. That's what I mean by, going back to the original question, intermediate learning. You're not a beginner, or at least I don't consider myself a beginner anymore, because I don't behave and use Japanese like a beginner. A beginner could start on Bunpro, and everything that's tracked on Bunpro is the pretty much 90% of the only thing that they have, like, exposed to that. So if your thought process is a beginner, you want to know where to start, anything you start, the trackers are more accurate, because you're not, like, especially SRS, like exposure trackers, like these things, exposure trackers. How often do you think I've encountered, like, I'm looking at N5 and N4. How often do you think I've encountered these concepts on a daily basis outside Bunpro? I would say at least 30 to 40% of those things I see on a daily basis. Now they make sense. Now they're applying Bunpro's knowledge. So everything I learned in Bunpro, now I think about them when I see the stuff I already did see. When I watch anime, when I play Japanese video games, when I watch a Japanese broadcaster, all of this knowledge is now applied to the existing thing. Right? Oh, hello there. Yeah, I'm trying to answer the question. So, sorry that I totally did not read, like, when you, speaking of which, very serendipitously. So I was reading and I totally skipped your message. So I did leave a message there yesterday, but I imagine you left already. So, because I was like in the zone and stuff. So now this is what I'm saying. So, I don't know how long you've been here, Mark. Day 100, my day 100 like video, my day 100 video will describe what I have been doing, like this last 3 months. It's gonna end up being 4 months, but how I'm partitioning it. So the first 3 months was dedicated to N5, and the second like group is N4, and it's summarized in the day 100. Now the thing that I want to emphasize, I don't know how long you've been here when I'm like trying to clarify, the idea is, wherever you are, make sure you're doing more than memorization. Like, if you're going along the process, like the reason why I'm doing it this way is because this type of tracker stuff, it's no longer like useful to me, because I wouldn't know how long I've seen these. Like, some of the grammar points are going to be really, really strong. Some of the vocabulary ones, maybe yes, maybe no. So the thing I'm doing now is I want to make sure that when I'm paying attention to just the thing, or like the things that I can know that are new. But that's kind of what I wanted to say yesterday. If I was thinking about the thought process, we want to think about the progress, right? You notice you didn't see the question yesterday, but also wanted to let you play Days of Die in Peace. Okay, you could have, like, you're more than welcome to like stop me and investigate. So now that this is an opportune moment, so we can talk about it here. I don't know. I didn't get a chance since I was playing Dave the Diver. I didn't get a chance to ask you like where you are, like what's your interest in Bunpro. Usually when someone asks me for like a question or something, I kind of want to know a little bit about the other person who's asking, so then I could actually say something that is relevant to their interest. So the whole like Dave the Diver thing was like a kind of a weird coincidence of things. So I didn't get a chance to ask you like what are you doing with Japanese and where are you at now. My use of Bunpro is that now I just want to learn new things. So like I'm focused on using everything that I have that isn't memory. So I'm no longer using Bunpro in a way like, oh, I'm reading this for the first time, I need to memorize it. Now when I read things, I'm reading it to comprehend it. So it's kind of like when you learn English or like your native language. You didn't mention you have more than one language, and English is not just your primary. You have maybe a mother tongue and stuff. So for me, I'm in the time now where I use Japanese and I want to think of things in Japanese as I'm learning it. So even though English is the primary way to explain the grammar, when I read the grammar, I'm thinking of Japanese examples. So the idea is to encourage yourself to not just stick with memory anymore. Now use all the memories to explain things. So to give you an example, why is the vocabulary cue not touched, basically? So if we go to one of these entries, right? Technically, all of this information, right? All of this information right here, it's extra to me. So like, I want to learn all of this extra information, but it has to be in the context of wanikani, because I know a lot of information about character studies. So I studied characters for well over a year and a half, like several thousands of hours now. And the idea is I have to keep using my existing knowledge. So now that wanikani is reaching its end, every time I use it, I must also use all the knowledge that I have. That's the point, because I don't want to lose that information. I want to keep using it because that is my foundation now. So that's kind of what I mean by what is the thought process. The thought process is, if you learn something, make sure to find a way to keep using what you have memorized. You spent so much time memorizing, right? It's so hard. It's low effort, but it's hard to maintain, where yeah, your volume keeps growing through memory. So you have to convert what you memorized and use it immediately, even if it means learning in English still in your Genki textbook or something. You try to bring as much information that you spend so much time memorizing. The quicker, the longer, the more consistent you can do in using the stuff you're memorizing, you no longer need these things. So what I mean is, even though, like, for example, Bunpro is keeping track of all this, it's no longer true. Like, I don't want to give people the wrong impression. The impression is, I don't care how big this number is anymore. Or I don't, for vocabulary, I don't really care about that. I'm caring about when I read something, when I do something, I have to use that information immediately, because I should be able to use that information immediately. Kind of like when you're learning a new English word, right? When you're like reading through the word and you come across like the word custom, and you're like, I don't know what that word is, but I know all the words around it. So now that's how you have to start learning when you're no longer a beginner. Otherwise, you're going to forget them. They're not going to be great. Like, some people ask me, well, how do you learn new English words? Like this. You relate them to your existing words. Otherwise, you're going to forget it. Like, if I define the word for you now, right? Crepuscular is the newest word that I remembered. Crepuscular. So, if you don't know the word crepuscular, the reason why I know it is because it is a Chinese word. Like, so I had to learn a Chinese vocabulary word. Yesu Guang, right? Yesu Guang, and they defined it as crepuscular rays. So the only way the way that I have acquired a new English word is by using the Chinese that I memorized with the context. So it doesn't have to be English on English, Chinese on Chinese, Japanese on Japanese. It can be Japanese to English or Chinese to Japanese. The idea is you have to use the knowledge. Otherwise, it's going to go away. And you can rely on SRS to track it if you want. I have found from Wanikani that 6 months, I agree, it's like the longest period you can possibly get. So then what happens after 6 months again, I don't know yet. It's almost been that long. So it's been a year, right? And some of the stuff that go back, they're good because I used them. The stuff that aren't good, six months plus, that's a stretch. So if you think you can remember, 2,000 plus kanji and don't use any of them, only use them once like a year, for me, I'm not going to chance that. That's really bold to think that you just use a kanji once a year and you're going to keep it, for me personally. Oh yeah, you're doing wanikani as a way to keep Japanese low maintenance? Yeah, before you make the time for some classes. Nice. That's exactly what I mean. But really needed something more to allow any immersion whatsoever. Exactly. And Bunpro seems cool from what you've seen on my channel. Your experience with it? Okay. Yeah, about using all the knowledge, you guess that custom notes must be super important to keep Chinese separate, right? Yeah. So how I like read notes and stuff and whatnot, like if I'm reading this stuff, I use notes all the time for all of the things that are like need organizing. So like, for example, this doesn't need organizing, right? That's just anime, right? That anime. But if I'm thinking to my head, 动画is the word that I'm going to use. So I can always add more notes, or it can be somewhere else. So when I hear anime, I hear 动画, or 动画 is anime in Chinese. So that's kind of how you would go about it. And writing notes can do that. So in the future, whenever I encounter like a vocabulary word that I have a problem with, I can use Wanikani's mnemonics that I generated or like I integrated from them and write Chinese phrases, whatever information you have. So that takes a long time, and it's not low maintenance like using SRS blanketed. So oftentimes I don't have that much time. So the goal now is to keep doing it at a higher level. not low maintenance anymore. So whenever I'm using Bunpro, it feels like it gets people anxious because some people tend to come in and say like the answer is this, like just use the answer. And my thought is, well, I'm going through Chinese, I'm going through English, I'm going through all of the possibilities that I know, because I don't want to come back to this and think all I did was memorize it. I'm not here to just memorize things anymore. I'm here to engage in it. So when you say you really needed something more to allow any immersion whatsoever, you can immerse in mechanical things. Like, the idea is, how can you make all your Wanikani knowledge useful? Like, even the gags and the mnemonics and the weird things you came up with that you got so used to, those are all habits you have formed. So if you want to discard those habits, it's going to feel like you wasted your time. You can bring the habits if you want, and that takes time. The nice thing about time is that it is high maintenance, and it also means that you are likely using more effort, more higher effort. Again, grain of salt. Sometimes people think higher effort is doing the same thing for longer periods of time. That is not what I'm referring to, right? If you're using Wanikani already and you're going to use Bunpro, use your Wanikani knowledge. Encourage yourself to use all your Wanikani knowledge while using Bunpro. And then when you're going back to Wanikani, Bunpro is that. So there is a bit of overlap. I started Bunpro. Bunpro is my 2026 project. 2025 was Wanikani, and Wanikani is about to end in less than a week. Every time I go to use Bunpro, I'm thinking about Wanikani, because that information is easy to access. It's easier to think of the characters now. So when someone asks me, what is the first thing I think about here? I immediately think about what it sounds like, because that's what I did in Wanikani all the time. And then what is the next thing I think about? I mapped this out in the 100-day review. Every 100 days, my thought process, like the routine I go through, I look at this. Intuition check. Intuition check would be, do I know how it sounds and immediately know the meaning? If I don't, the next thing is to look at the characters, look at the parts, the different radicals, then go through every single read that I know in Japanese, go through every single read that I know in Chinese, and so on and so forth. Then I go and read the new information that Bunpro offers, because this is not how Wanikani defines stuff, right? Wanikani is purely built around mnemonics, and that mnemonics is something that I already trimmed and edited myself over time. So that information is yours. The great thing about accessing information that you know is that anything you bring in that you're using from somewhere else that you're trying to memorize, you're doing double the amount of work, in my opinion, or even triple or quadruple. So when you want to keep Wanikani low maintenance, Wanikani could be even less maintenance. When you're using Bunpro, it should be refreshing everything you know about Wanikani. That's the whole point, right? When you synchronize with Bunpro, you're making the idea that every time you read these things, you should be triggering everything else that's related. If you're not, then you aren't comprehending it. You are memorizing it. When you memorize something, you can memorize things like this is the part that is the litmus test, if you want to know. Litmus test. If you, this is said a lot between people who use both Wanikani and Bunpro. There are quite a lot of people who use both, and then they talk about this. They ask, why is it that when I use Wanikani, I remember the characters? Right? Characters are no problem. It's like, yeah, I remember it. But then the moment I leave Wanikani and I look at a manga or go to Bunpro, I forget it. Like, it's harder. Like, okay, so what changed? What happened? It can be that the input and output are different, sure, right? Are different. And something like, for example, wanikani gives you, right? Wanikani gives you a space. The default, or sorry, wanikani gives you just the characters, right? It looks like this. This is what wanikani looks like. Everything else is gone, and all you see is this. And then you convert it into a read and a meaning. That is the order, right? Right? And in Bunpro, it doesn't do that. It gives you a blank, its main input. Bunpro's main input is now here's the thing. And then since you have a blank, you have an English phrase, ideally. That's how this starts, like the default. And then that will produce a visual thing and a read, like a visual and in output, which then leads to an audio cue and a character cue. So it's a different order, right? When you look at the blank, you see an English word. This is the default Bunpro. And then your fingers are going to go and output something. And that visual and audio will confirm whether the read and stuff is. Now, the thing is, how are you going to make these two things the same? Like, how are you going to relate these things? Right? What are you going to do? How are you going to relate it? Because if you don't consciously relate those things, they're going to constantly be separate. Like, and this is the comment that I get a lot when someone says, okay, on wanikani, no problems. Characters are good. Like, oh yeah, it's so easy, right? Check. Really good. Then you go to Bunpro and like, it feels like I don't know any characters. But I know all the meanings. Like, oh, I understand the meanings and stuff. And while you sit here and you're thinking, but if I step back, like if I leave Bunpro and wanikani, right? Just leave Bunpro and wanikani. You take out a piece of paper and you're wondering, but I know they're related. Like if I know the word, I should know the characters. So it shouldn't be different. And yet, why is it so hard to connect the information? That's what I mean by you actually have to do it. You have to see the connection. You have to encourage yourself. Okay, well, this is the first time I'm using Bunpro. Okay, so what do I know in wanikani when I'm reading this? And then check to see how this information connects with your wanikani information. And vice versa. So when I'm doing Bunpro, I'm practicing wanikani. When I'm in wanikani, I'm practicing Bunpro. So whenever someone says, like, it works really well because if you know some of the grammar in Bunpro, what happens is you can sort the wanikani, which wanikani doesn't have this because it's not its focus. You can sort adverbs, adjectives together. You can sort grammar phrases together. Like, sonna, donna, anna, like sokoado stuff. You can sort all of them together. You can sort all the nominalization stuff together. So you know how to nominalize something. So if you look at a character and you're like, okay, but this character has a ri or a mi, you know what type of words these are, and it's just the character form of them. So when you study Bunpro, you can apply it to wanikani as a shortcut to understanding what's the difference between skuri, right? Skuri versus skuru. Skuri and skuru are related to each other by its character, but you can't explain why they're related until you read Bunpro. then it's easier to remember because it's easier to think of everything. So in the future, when you're practicing what you're doing in Bunpro, Wanikani should be getting easier too. I don't think that's what happens often. People keep the two things separate. They don't want to look at the relationship. So then, right? So then someone would say, well, it's complementary. But the beginner would say, I don't get it. Why is it complementary? It feels like I'm doing double the work. You know, you're constantly doing double the work. It's like, yes, one day those things are going to be connected. Because when you have Wanikani and Bunpro, how the heck are you going to get into a manga? Like, if you can't associate these two things together and they're literally trying to give you the same information, like the same information, and you can't connect them together because they're different, you know, they're different methods, so to speak, then what happens when you go to a manga? You're going to be like, man, I know all these terms in Wanikani, but the moment I see them in a manga, I blank out. I have no idea what they are. Like, I can't remember them, right? And then you go like, okay, so then what happens when you get to a podcast with Japanese subtitles? And you're like, oh man, now I can read manga, but I can't seem to understand podcast Japanese subs because they're separate things. For now, they're literally not separate things. So conceptually, you can still process, you can still understand, it's still all Japanese. Yet, it's very difficult because you didn't make the association just, right? So, let's see what you said. Yeah, I guess reducing Bunpro to mechanically guessing what the answer is sort of like not reading, basically. Yeah, not reading quests in the RPG. Exactly. What you propose is not only more useful, but also keeps the motivation alive. Basically, like you're trying to not waste your time, right? When you're playing an RPG game, when you jump into an RPG game, and you're, right? Say you play an RPG game, let's say you play Resident Evil 7, right? I know Resident Evil is not an RPG. Let's say Monster Hunter Story. Monster Hunter Story is a great game series to practice your Japanese, by the way. They also have kana support, I'm pretty sure. Like furigana support. Anyways, say you are playing Monster Hunter 3, right? You're playing Monster Hunter 3, but you already played Monster Hunter 1 and 2. Are you telling yourself, oh yeah, I'm playing Monster Hunter 3 with no knowledge of Monster Hunter 1 and 2? Like, you're not connecting the story. You're not saying, oh, hey, the main character, it's the same main character that's in 1 and 2. Or, hey, it's a different main character. So what happened to the other previous main character? You're making connections, right? You're associating, you're using all the information. So when sequels come out, like Persona 6, right? You might be thinking, oh man, but all the Persona games are not connected. Yet some people still remember what Persona 5 is, Persona 4 is, Persona 3, right? And they all have different main characters. And yet they're all connected. How? Because of their contexts. All of their contexts are similar. They all deal with Persona. They all have a Velvet Room. So what is Bunpro? Bunpro is the grammar structure. That should be present in nearly all your Japanese stuff. Bunpro is using characters. That should be present in all of your Japanese studies. So the idea is the things you learned in Wanikani and Bunpro, use them or lose them. And comprehension comes from your foundation. So whatever you started first will build on that. If your foundation keeps eroding, it's gonna feel like that typical conversation that I have this conversation a lot where someone says, oh, I want to learn Japanese now, right? And I ask them, oh, is this your first time? Like, no, I quit 4 years ago. I learned it for 1 year and now I'm back. And before that 1 year, 2 years ago, I learned from 1 year and now I'm back. So now they're starting again 6 years later ish, and they're starting from square one. And my first thought is, how's that possible? How is it that this person didn't want to hold on to any of their things? And obviously, all the things that I'm talking about right now is not my story. I don't often do this anymore. Maybe when I was 16 years old, I used to do this where I learned something, or quote unquote memorize something, and immediately forget it after the test, right? I talked about this before. When I was younger, I'm no different. Like, it's a human response. When I was in high school, the way I get A's and 4.0s is I memorize the stuff and then I move on to the next thing to memorize. But most of it wasn't because of comprehension. It was due to memorization. When you're a kid, there's a lot of empty space up here, so you memorize a lot of things. And then when you memorize, they no longer stay with you. The memories that do stay with you are all the things that get triggered over and over and over again in different ways. Your love of sports, or your love of passion, whatever your hobby is, the emotional desperation of social anxiety, right? I'm throwing in a few topical things. Those things get triggered again and again and again in different formats. That's called habit, right? Habit formation leads from comprehension, etc. Comprehension and habit formation tends to be intuitive. Comprehension tends to be cautious. So if you can get that, that is what I mean by once you become an intermediate learner at this point. And cool idea about the litmus test. But you guess Bunpro also tries to suggest your approach as you are basically inundated with knowledge on the info card and have to focus on something. Exactly. So Bunpro is taking that, and I like this personally. Now remember that this is my process. So like my journey, right? When you go from Wanikani to Bunpro, it feels the way you want to think about it is that way. Bunpro is offering you a lot of information. It's not no longer holding your hand. Like Bunpro, in my opinion, is not designed in a way that is telling you, hey, this is the minimum amount of things that are important to you. Wanikani does that. Wanikani tells you, hey, we don't want to overwhelm you. So this is one of the differential factors between the philosophy building and Anki. When you go from Bunpro to Anki, Anki is like, I'm a platform. You have to know what you want to know in order to use me. Bunpro is like, okay, we're kind of an Anki platform, but we just want to dump all the information possible and organize it for you. Now it's up to you to know if you want to know those information. Wanikani is completely structured. So it is telling you, hey, here's the minimum amount. We're going to make it emotional. And if it doesn't work, you're going to have to look for something else that will work. But this is what we think. This is a good starting point. Like these mnemonics, think about them and then hope you develop your own. And then when you get to Bunpro, it's like, okay, so now what do you want to know? Here's all the information that we think are important and even more than you possibly could need. Decide how you're going to use that information. So I think Bunpro is a great, in terms of thought process, if you're going from something like, and Duolingo is where I started. So Duolingo is like, okay, we're not going to tell you why these things are important, and we're only going to tell you just little things over and over again and hope that you'll be interested in moving on beyond Duolingo at some point. Duolingo is known for language exposure. It's not for language mastery or anything. It's to get you interested in language. So it's introductory. It's not the greatest thing when it comes to fidelity and nuance. That's where I had a thought process that go way before it. The reason why I started with Duolingo, then went to Wanikani, then now Bunpro, and then now I'm actually playing video games and talking about the Japanese in the video games, right? So the idea is I learned English and I still keep in touch with my Chinese. And how do I know those things? Well, I didn't stop learning English. That's the difference, in my opinion. One of the biggest difference is, did you stop learning? If you stop learning and you're starting up again, it can be very tough. And you have to rediscover all of that again. Because if you stop learning, that also means you stop practicing too. And it goes back to the start of all this digression. Your short-term memory is always still going to be short-term memory. And even long-term memory need maintenance. So if you're asking yourself, like, 5 years down the road, the last thing you learned was back in high school, like some 10 years ago, it's going to take some time to get all that back. I'm not saying it's going to disappear forever. It's more like riding a bike. You get on, so a couple of the months is a little bit rough, and then we're revisiting again. I didn't stop learning ever since I could learn, so all of this stuff may seem like a lot of work. Take it with a grain of salt, right? At your own pace. Let's see. You notice while doing all of this, you also undo some of your answers as well, and this resonates with you. You have a math background, and trying different things doesn't screw up intuition, but reinforce it. Exactly. I go with the process of know things, do things, tackle it as many ways possible. So, the only time I concerned myself with memorizing and getting it right the first time was at the beginning. But that was a long time ago. I know someone say, like, you've only been doing this for 2.5 years. How can that be a long time ago? Yeah, but I did it for like 8 to 10 hours a day every single day for 2.5 years. The idea is, once you stop memorizing, now you're doing it for comprehension. It's no longer whether you know it or you don't. It's how you know it, why you know it, what else do you know that's related. I think that is the most important thing when you become an advanced learner or an intermediate learner in the skill that you're working on. So the difference, in my opinion, between an intermediate advanced Japanese language learner or any other learner who has learned something in a skill that is advanced, like conceptually, they're not there to test themselves predominantly by, oh, do you remember this today? By like a jerk reflex. Do you remember this? Do you have the correct answer in this moment, time, and space? It's more like, you got it wrong. All right, let's go back. What else do I know? It's still wrong. Okay, how about let's try to think of it this way. It's still wrong. Okay, well, I have enough information here, I think. I'm pretty sure I have enough information here. So let's go and take this information, and do it again and again. Because the moment you can prove it, which your background in mathematics, by the way, I don't have a background in mathematics. However, when you're doing a mathematical proof, right, it is so interesting when you get to complex problems. Like, we're talking about like the application of mathematics. How many different ways people can come up with a mathematical proof. You know what I mean? And that to me is how I definitely resonate with you when you mention you're trying different things, because the intuition is that you're trying to test all of your existing intuition and proofs. The reason why I resonate with that is my background is in science. So I was in biology, molecular biology. So I did research at my like peak specialization. And when you're trying to answer a difficult problem, you're inundated with all the information you can possibly that exists, but you're also responsible. On top of that, you're responsible for digesting, integrating all that information to answer a question with a whole set of permutations of predictable outcomes. or extrapolatory outcomes, and even unpredictable outcomes. So the idea is when you reach advanced learning, right? When you are an advanced learner and an advanced problem solver, you are not looking to simply test yourself to say yes or no to replicate something. You're there to understand the process of how you went about it. So for me, if someone asks me something like, I don't know, like someone would say, oh, I'm having trouble, for example, I'm having trouble remembering this character, like whatever this is. What is the read for this? Well, tell me what you know. Like, tell yourself what you know. What do you know about this? Well, here's flower, right? Here's generation. Here's tree. What does flower, generation, tree have in common? Well, the sky's the limit. That's a lot of permutations. Flowers, general, and tree, right? This is more so like a accounting. I would call it more of an accounting. And like a leaflet with an accounting, right? Generational, something off of a tree and a flower. It's an accounting. And then when you have this looks like, to me, there's a brush. There can be maybe a dirt, but we'll see how far you go about that. And then there's day. Now, all of this stuff doesn't have to be exactly correct. Like, you're not here to talk about, oh, well, the technical radical is not day, it's sun. It's like, okay, well, I guess we can add sun to it, sure. And that bottom is not really dirt, because brush and dirt equals something else, right? Which someone can argue this. It's not, I don't know what this is. I'm sure someone can argue this, because oftentimes this character is viewed as two parts. Now, if you put them together, you can already see the mnemonics of how I get to postcard. And hagaki eventually. So here you can see that, okay, a generational accounting on something that's made of wood that deals with writing it down about your day. That kind of sounds like a postcard. Now, about hagaki, so ha, this is ha because leaf is ha. And gaki is the nounified, nominalized ga. Oh, or it's actually ka. And where do you get ka? Karu. Or no, so not karu, kaku. And kaki, this is using a mix of Bunpro and Wanigani. Gaki is something that is written. So gaku, you're gonna know that deals with writing. Gaku. There's another gaku, but gaki, kaki, and then you know that when you combine ha, this is a kunyomi. So this is kun, and this then is likely to be kun. And chukukos usually are on, so you don't use on, use a kun. And kun, the second thing is usually a rendaku. And that's where you get gaki, hagaki. So all of this is something I know, and it takes a very long time to explain it. Is it interesting to someone? Well, if you're saying, I just want to memorize a term, then you'll only memorize the term. For myself, this is interesting. And this is only part of the information. Because now we have to think about all the Chinese parts and all the alternative reads. Like hagaki, you can narrow down to hagaki, but this is also sho. It can be sho. So how do you rationalize sho out of if you start thinking about it as sho first, right? Because jukugo, you can do onyomi and onyomi. However, this case, this character is unlikely to be on because it's a non-traditional on. So you can make all these rationales, and it's good, at least in my opinion. It takes a lot of time. However, for me, that's how I'm going about it now. It's no longer, can I memorize this? Because I don't want to spend most of my time remembering individual points. Individual points, mathematically speaking, right? Mathematically speaking, it doesn't scale. There's no scaling. You're constantly remembering one-to-one facts, constantly one-to-one over and over again. There's no scaling. It's just one-to-one. Eventually, when you look at this, you should be scaling like 10-to-1, or sorry, not 10-to-1, the other way around. Your thought process should be like 1-to-10, like, or higher. Your scaling has to get higher, because when you're looking at something, it should stimulate, depending on how you look, it should stimulate more memories. You focus on the specifics of this explanation too much, but you see the point. Yeah. Now, the idea is do more, right? You're trying to do more. The reason why I believe in this is my personal theory or perspective, and coincidentally, when I'm watching YouTube, the algorithm feeds me people who also kind of agree on this. You're thinking about it more like neuronal networks, right? Right, neuronal networks. So the idea is, if you have one zenith of memory, we're going to use a neuron as a depiction of a specific memory. So let's just say this is a particular fact, right? And then you have another particular fact that you're going. The idea that something gets stronger is how many associated memories you have. So when you're having a connection, quote unquote, a literal or figurative, however you manage, the meshwork in neuronal connections is how much everything overlaps. Now, this comes with a trade-off. The trade-off comes in the aspect of interference, right? This is where some people say, like, well, that's not good because you're going to have to juggle interference. Yes, where you have interference, you also have synergy. So, like, I learned Chinese when I was learning, like, I learned to read Chinese and Japanese at the same time. So it would create natural interference. This is where you don't want your wires crossed. Like, you don't want, like, to read this as Chinese if you're reading Japanese. So it requires an intermediate learning strategy to sort. When you can sort, that's usually a level 3 type of thinking. Level 5 is level 5, the lower the worse. So we're talking about like a pyramid here. So bottom is memory. Eventually comprehension leads to the top 3. One of the 3 is comparative analyses. The top one is creation. So comparative analyses is when you take things that are confusingly similar or barely distinctive and you sort them. So you sort, you're able to organize your mind palace, right? Sort your webs and your information, your notes, and that becomes both a boon and a point of maintenance. So you're no longer maintaining, you're no longer focusing on trying to ask if you memorize something, you're asking if you sort it properly. So every time you take in new information, you're sorting it into your library. So now when you're taking on a new vocabulary word, I immediately sort it into a noun, right? Into is Chinese synonym. Into what type of object it is. maybe sort it into its materials, and the materials would be represented in Japanese. The other objects would be represented in Japanese. This would obviously be in Chinese, and noun would still be in English because I don't have any categorizations memorized yet enough to use them. So like I don't know the word for noun, for example, off the top of my head. So then I would place it in English noun. So my example, this would immediately get sorted into a place where I sort English nouns, the Chinese synonym, the objects that would feel like postcards, like kami, right? Paper. A postcard is made of paper. Kami. It would be associated with the Japanese word kami, right? And then in terms of its wait, what is this last thing? Oh, the material. Wood, leaf, tree, generation, and flower. You can sort into mnemonics, so this would be the mnemonic sort, right? Both in English and Japanese. So what is the leaf? What is tree? Ki, right? Ki. Moksen. Moksen is wooden, something that's wooden. So moku, and zen, mokzen. Zen is nature. So you put nature and wood together and you get mokzen, which is something that's wooden or made of wood, which it's not quite the best because you could use kami. It's made of paper, like kamino, or kami de, right? Kami kara dekiru, right? It's made from paper, and those are the things you would sort in. So in the future, it's no longer saying, oh, I need to memorize this exact thing with the minimum amount of information. It's now more like I read this and I'm like, I wonder how this is interesting to me. Like, okay, I know this is a gaki here, but it's also sho. That's kind of neat. That's kind of where we're going on it. And I think the closer you get to that point is the closer you'll get to where eventually you're like, well, I'm just going to redefine this in Japanese. Right? A Japanese, maybe you could use something like yasumi. I'm going to write in Nomaji just because I can. So yasumi, right? You can think of yasumi kami. And maybe kaku. Yeah, kaku works. So why does these work? Rest or vacation. Now the English version, rest, vacation, paper, write. What is that? A postcard. Right? A postcard. You would typically, while you're on rest or vacation, buy something that's a piece of paper that you write on. And then you could say like todokeru or something, to deliver, or okuru, to send. And that's where you start getting to the point where, well, now you're not using just English, you're using Japanese. So is it going to be hard for you to forget yasumi, ami, kaku, right? Odokeru, okuru. Are you going to forget those? You're probably less likely to forget those because you're already using Japanese where you can. So no, you don't have to always do podcasts and YouTube and move to Japan to give yourself an incentive for Japanese. You can immerse yourself in using the Japanese, whether in a form that you have memorized it already. You don't have to go beyond it if you don't want to, but using it creates that opportunity to be transformative, right? So memorization can be triggered elsewhere. You can output them immediately. And that's the great thing. Like this is sorted into also kyokasho, 교과서 for textbook. And enpitsu for pencil. Pen, just for pen, right? Pen is katakana. So when I think of sho, I think of a book, right? Ben, which is Chinese for book. This, right? Ben, right? Or in this case, hon, bon, pon would be the reads for Japanese. So all of this stuff can be sorted, and then because you use all of your Japanese or as much Japanese you can whenever you're doing quote unquote trivial low maintenance task of memory, all these other things you won't need to do them again. Like what I mean is over time you're not going to need to use those anymore. You're not there to have to remember them because now they have context. Trying to remember postcard is going to trigger every one of these Japanese words. And right now, since I'm not writing kanji, usually I write kanji in a separate time in my day. Eventually, I can output the kanji. For now, I haven't been practicing outputting the kanji, but that's not where I'm focused on. Right now, I'm focusing on reading, right? And then we're using targeted vocabularies and targeted grammar things. So I'm not in the process of writing entire sentences. I mean, I don't even do that in English. When someone asks, how do you do a diagram, right? Like, how do you go through a thought process? I use a flowchart with keywords. So how do I depict Japanese and Chinese thought process? Keywords. And eventually those keywords will turn into kanji and hanzi when I'm able to. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it's really neither because I haven't really gotten there. So at some point, one day, I'm basically going to do what I did in Duolingo. Yeah, I did this way back in Duolingo, where whenever, how Duolingo does it is they do it by theme, and then they do it by like antonym, synonym, and part of speech. So when their units are sorted in that way. So what happens at the end is what I would do is I would take all the characters that I've learned and I create a flowchart of how they're related. So something like if they introduce paper, they're probably going to introduce a brush, and they're probably going to introduce homework or something. So then the flowchart would be this. That would be one way to associate the three things, right? Kami, I don't really know what type of brush they would use for this. It's probably some sort of han. So han is a common thing in Chinese for brush, like brush indicator. And then shukudai could be used for homework, right? In some way, it's a task, right? That's kind of how you would encourage yourself to constantly use it, because you're reminding yourself. The TL, like the very bottom line is, remember that you're using as much Japanese as you can possibly can, and that is a form of immersion. To me, one thing that I have to keep in mind when someone says immersion, there's one thing that I often feel like is missing in the argument for immersion. Immersion has to be habit forming. Because immersion is very taxing. So if it's incredibly taxing, possibly oftentimes overwhelming, right? Taxing and overwhelming because it's obligation. It's putting yourself in an environment. If it's not habit forming, then you're going to quit. So you can do varying levels of immersion by forming habits. So if you can form the habits, that's what I'm doing. When I did Duolingo, the focus of my methods and thought process is to form as many habits that will be part of me for the rest of my life. Like, I'm forming all of the habits that will continue to immerse me in my task. So when I'm defining Japanese characters, I'm looking at Chinese characters at the same time. That is called immersion to me. When you are immersing yourself in something, is that the habits you form can never take you out of it. Like, you literally want to do it because it is part of you. When you play a video game, you immerse yourself in the video game. The immersion that people are selling, right, online, the selling one is providing immersion. So that is a hit and miss. You have no control over when someone sells you immersion. If you move to Japan, Japan is providing you the immersion. So you either suck it up and take it in, or you quit and leave. Learning is a form of immersion. You can immerse yourself in something that isn't supposed to immerse you. Yeah, this basically applies to stuff other than language as well. Yeah, the whole idea is I've been playing video games for most of my like I've been streaming video games for most of my life, and oftentimes people ask me like, so how do you know what type of games you want to play, or what type of games you find interesting or not? It's like, well, I play games to find out if they're interesting. I am interested in the idea of playing a video game. So I am already invested and immersed in the idea of analyzing video games. Now, if the video game sweeps me off my feet and cause me to involuntarily be immersed in it, that's a positive. Like, it's a plus plus plus. Like, but a game isn't responsible for all of the immersion. It is my interest, my active interest in the game that creates that. So that's why I like streaming games. I like talking about both the pros and cons, the math, the principles, the objectivity, and then what the subjectivity gives me. So oftentimes someone shows me something. They shows me a bunch of pictures, right? They're like, hey, I think all of these things, I like these things. And then I would ask them, so can you tell me a little bit about them? Like, did you learn anything from them? Why did you select these? Why did you select these pictures? And then the person's like, well, I need time to collect and stuff. It's like, that's good. And then they ask me, did you find anything interesting? And I often answer, well, like you, I didn't have time to process it. However, you have to consider the idea that I immerse in things because you are interested in it. So like, what makes certain games like language learning and stuff interesting to me, even though it doesn't have to be about language learning, is I want to know how other people become interested in things. I am interested in that process, because sometimes you really do have to do things that aren't inherently interesting. So how do you stay inquisitive? How do you stay curious? I mean, learning Japanese is going to be fairly miserable if you hate grammar and you hate kanji and all you're focused on is how much Japanese can entertain you. It's like, well, what happens when it doesn't entertain you? Do you quit? Personally, I like to put things in my own wheelhouse. So I turn boring things into fun things, or into exciting things, or intriguing things. That's why whenever I think about apps, someone would ask, so why did you choose Bunpro? Like, well, someone told me that Bunpro was very interesting to them. I want to figure out why that's the case. So I was interested in Bunpro for the sake of studying Bunpro, like how Bunpro presents its information. Not like learning Japanese is is extra in the sense that it is part of my goals, but I'm doing more than that. Like, it's nice to be consistently being able to be interested in things without being completely dependent on what that thing is. Like, nowadays, I think the thing is the internet is expected, or actually condition people to expect that things are there to serve them. So whenever you're playing a video game, someone would get upset that the video game is exactly what it is, but it's not the thing, it didn't serve them. So like they couldn't find interest in the video game because the video game is not targeted to them. Like it's not their cup of tea. And my first thought is like, it would be interesting to figure out why it's not my cup of tea. Because the evidence would be the contrary oftentimes. Like someone would say, oh, I really hate this video game. Why do like 5 million people play this video game? I hate this video game. I played it and it wasn't all that special. It's like, I would love to know why it was that special to 5 million people, and then compare and contrast to why it doesn't vibe with me. That would be curious. So it's one of those, like, you can do that if you want. And those are the particular challenges that I enjoy. Whenever someone says, oh yeah, Japanese is the hardest thing to learn for an English speaker, I wonder why that is. For myself, I wanted to really know. And then I learned a bunch of other things where someone always assumed, like, I can't tell you, 9 out of 10 people assume that if I'm speaking English, that's the only language I know. I mean, despite clearly appearing not like a very stereotypical monolingual English speaker, but that's besides the point, because the internet conditions you to provide all the information, not the other way around. You don't have to do any deductive thinking. Yeah, you guess this really is about stuff being interconnected, not independent and granular. Yeah. If something interesting depends on the boring stuff, it's easier to do it anyways. yeah, exactly. That is where the motivation comes from. Mark, whenever someone asks me about my thought process, or they inculcate, like, do you have any ideas, or what do you do to keep consistent and whatnot, my first thought is make sure you have control over it. Or like try your best to have control over it. So there are a couple things that people would focus on. Make sure it's worth. And we already talked about worth. Worth is the value of your time, right? Worth is the value of your time. And in this case, one of the primary factors is memory. So if you increase worth, if you find any possible way to retain your memory, because that is the value of your time when it comes to language learning. And then there are others, right? We have structure. Structure is the other one. This is the form of either the most focus is self-prescribed obligation. And alternatively, if you go to school or go to class, external obligation. So these are like the many factors that typically come with it. Then we have application. Application is the other one. And application deals with either a task-based solution, or a creation. So I would say among the top 10 topics or something, these three factors would typically be in the negative somewhere for someone who has either quit or find it too daunting. It's not worth their time, because every time they think about trying to memorize kanji, they think about all the times they forget. Every time they think about moving to a new platform, how they lose all the information that they've remembered from their old platform. So they want a singular platform that contains everything. And yet, a singular platform is actually a modular collection of many platforms. And the moment that platform disappears, the value proposition is gone because the structure also disappears. Because you have no more obligation to maintain it. And that obligation disappears because they do not have an application or a form of task that they're going to do, or have a incentive to create something. So all three of these things are typically in the negative. Like, it's not any one of these things most of the time. Like, usually a waste of time isn't necessarily sufficient for someone to quit. It's usually at least two of these things or all three of these things, which is a consistent reminder that you are losing your value of your time at the loss of information that you were trying to collect or understand over time. So anytime SRS continues to give you sufficient feedback that says, hey, guess what? You have like 20% leaches and your accuracy is like 70%. That's 30% loss on your return over and over again to the day-to-day. That is a constant negative feedback for a diminished return on your worth. And then the structure is, if it's not self-imposed, then that external structure has to be imposed. SRS fulfills that. It gives you your timing for when you need to do reviews or lessons. Self-imposition is like me choosing to stream. No one is telling me when to stream. I specifically prioritize streaming for the sake of demonstration and education before the SRS. So it really doesn't matter what type of application I use, what type of game I use. My self-imposed obligation provides the structure regardless of any external factors. But I can add external factors. So Wanikani has an external factor. It tells me when to do my reviews, when to do my lessons. So I shape Wanikani around my self-imposed obligation. Bunpro is the same. Yes, that screams 2,162 reviews, but my self-imposed obligations is well beyond and higher and can negotiate with Bunpro's obligations. So this is in check for me. And then I have application, streaming, education, demonstration, building legacy, and I'm literally content creating. So all these obligations, all of these things are in place for me. Now, when these three things fail, usually that's where on average, it breaks the camel's back. This is the threshold when you are lacking a sense of worth from day to day, year to year, etc., where the structure is either not sufficient to maintain consistency because you're either not holding yourself accountable or you don't have any external factors holding you accountable, like classes, tutoring, language exchange, living in Japan. And then your applications are your day-to-day tasks. Like, are you consistently doing a task on top of memorization, right? Memorization is the lowest form, so you want to add a task to do. And one thing that's really cute, and a great example that people have done in the Bunpro community is, have you written your Japanese sentence today? Right, so I'm extrapolating from reading Wanikani forums and Bunpro forums, and then all the negative mixed messages about Duolingo and whatnot, the combination. Usually things like this, that's a task. And this is a task and an obligation. Because when you start connecting to a forum and a community of people, that creates a self-imposed obligation. So this is a task that provides a self-obligation obligation. So this is a very strong promoter to offset one of the three. And because the forum keeps track of days, and this is a daily, that also provides a sense of time and value. Because this, when you write into a forum, it's permanently etched there unless you delete it. So you have a collection, a journal of all the things you have written. So most of the, like, quote unquote hacks, you know, like when people talk about hacks and they talk about hacks are typically to solve a tough problem, a problem or a deficiency that is very common. So in that way, I would call this a hack, but it's more of a habit. You're trying to create a habit, and the habit that tackles worth, structure, and application. And this can be applied, in my opinion, nearly universally to everything. This stuff here is, I'm talking about human condition stuff. So all of this is human condition. When you have these in CI, you know, like I'm sure you probably read some of the stuff on CI because of language learning, but oftentimes people talk about CI like it's a concept to the point that it's a method. However, oftentimes they overlook something. What does this look like? Well, this is the part of the theory, quote unquote, concept of CI where they talk about the effector factors. These are all the effectors. It's not a coincidence. This was my narrative before someone told me to read Stephen Krashen's work, or at least have some cursory understanding of Stephen Krashen's work, because people throw around CI all the time because of the necessity of immersion, right? So when we go back to the concept of immersion is not a method, it's a concept. Do you have these things checked? How do you get immersion on a worth? Your interest provides the worth. How do you get a structure? Your interest provides the habit that you have, because it wouldn't be interesting otherwise. Interest is based on the habit formation that you already have. You know what you're interested in because it's based on your habits, right? You have a habit of being interested in something. That's where that interest comes from. And then that interest is supposed to breed an application. And this is where hit and miss happens. So sometimes it can be a hit or miss because you might not be able to, with your interest and the habit you have, even with the structure, you may not necessarily have an application or creation for it. And that's where it brings us to today's digression. The people that I typically talk to over time, they already understand their worth, typically, and they already understand their structure. That means they know how much time they want to invest in something. They have an idea where to start, how often they're going to do, and then that is equated to their time, their worth, and what they want to retain. So the weak link often is from the source of application. So that's where I would sit on the intermediate scale. So when you want to reach intermediate learning in any of your skills, application is usually the hit and miss part. I don't have to concern the person about what they think their time is worth, because they're going to vibe all that stuff based on interest and motivation already. And then their structure is going to be imposed. It's either self-imposed out of interest or externally imposed because they have to do it. School, jobs, relations, paying the bills, etc. Now, that doesn't mean I don't talk about these things. Oftentimes I associate with a lot, like I become associated with the people that are depressed, or they're very self-deprecating, right? Or they have low self-esteem. That's when we work on worth and structure before application. You can't get someone to do something if they don't think it's worth doing, and they have no sense of ability to structure it in a way that they can stay consistent. And that goes with pretty much everything. And what type of thing do you think it is? Dieting, sleep hygiene, cardio. Those are separate things, right? Cardio, sleep hygiene, dieting. When you cannot be interested from a sense of self-worth, then that would be the first catalyst. And this is usually prescriptionally in this order: worth, structure, application. If you're thinking about language learning, how this is not, if this sounds very reminiscent, the first thing a beginner would say is, hey, where should I spend my time doing? Is this worth my time to start wanikani? And then the next thing they would ask is, okay, so what does that mean? How often will I have to do reviews? Will this feel good every time? Like, when can I do this? How fast can I do this? And when will it tell me? Will it tell me what to do, when and where, so I don't have to worry about it? And then the last step is where quitting happens. Quitting or not quitting. Basically, they go through developing their worth and their structure, or a structure, like wanikani structure. And without the application, there's nowhere else to go. So if you weren't encouraging yourself to find your application elsewhere, find your implementation, or create something like draw a picture and call it, draw a tree and write ki on there. If you're not doing those things, there's nowhere to go. There's no expansion. So it ends there. And that's when you have the 1 to 2 year cycle that happens. Someone studies a language for 1 year and they quit. 1 year, quit. 1 year, quit. What does that sound like? Learning language in school. School tells you that it's worth. School tells you that you must be interested in this. The external obligation is that you get a good grade for school. In order for your application to be applied to whatever you're interested in, right? However, if you fail to see the worth of school to get grades, then you don't have the application or creation for those skills. Hence, most of the things in school you lose. Like, you don't remember the things that fail all 3 of those. Usually school provides the first 2. A structure, an institution, your parents, they provide and tell you that it is worth getting good grades in school, and it's imposed on you what the obligations are. When you become an adult, you have to choose if there is application or creation to maintain those skills. If you don't, then they're not going to be there anymore. So that to me is what education taught me, at least in my opinion. And for a quick TLDR, the TLDR about my educational background, I spent pretty much my entire life in education. I haven't been in science for 7 years, but in those 7 years, I've been streaming on Twitch and now YouTube and writing things. I usually talk about education. Like, I consume content about education because that is my life. I enjoy being an educator, a mentor of some sort. Even how to enjoy video games. And no, it's not the right way to enjoy video games. That's not the same. I'm not here to sound like a guru where I'm telling you how to correctly enjoy something, correctly do something. I'm telling you how you can do something, what you can do something, like why do you do something, not what is correct or what is wrong. Because if you want that, you can probably ask any guru online. They'll sell you their product on how to do something, right? And that's a great place to start. I'm not saying they're like not worth their time. When you have nowhere to start, you want someone, again, that's why guru stuff works and like apps work. When you start, if you have no semblance of worth and no semblance of structure, go online. You have plenty of apps that's going to tell you, we're worth your time, we're worth your money, follow our structure. And with that, I would enter the picture then and ask you, so what are you going to do now? When you spent a year with an app that provided structure for you, did you find the application and what you're going to do after that? Because you have to stop being a beginner, right? At some point, you want control and agency over what you have learned and the structures that you have, because when you become an adult, it's going to be very rare. It becomes rarer and rarer that the probability of someone knowing your entire schedule and your own self-worth will become less and less appropriate, because the averaging effect doesn't account for the individualized effect. Like, I talked about this joke a lot when John Green brought it up in a vlog. The average human does not exist. Think about it for a moment. Statistically, like mathematically, the average human does not exist. It does not account for individual variability. So like any single human, if you're saying, oh, you're an average human, there's going to be more things not average about that person when it comes to the landscape of their experiences and their life the older they get. So like average human is a population thing, right? It is telling you the frequent, like the range, it's giving you a distribution or a information about the distribution of humans. But think about what an average human would look like. Like if you met someone who literally is the average human, like, so it's hard to imagine, like, what would the average human look like? What type of hair does the average human have? With the average eyes. And John Green did this exercise where he chose, like, selectively chose the metrics that he cared about, and he, like, talked about this average human, hypothetical average humans, like, oh, so this average human sleeps exactly 8 hours a day, and they eat exactly 2,000 kilocalories a day. They walk exactly 10,000 steps a day. Like, you're thinking, like, wait, does that even, is there a human that actually do all those things? No. That's the effect of statistics, right? And that's what I feel when you're thinking about apps. Apps are based on data. Most products now are data driven. So you as a human, the user, have to account for your individual disparity from their targeted audience. So you can be the driver for more than 50, at least more than 50% of the reason why the product is like slightly better than it should be or slightly worse than it should be. So you are accounting for the variability, not the product, which that's like the new age thing. Developers of like games and stuff, when people talk like they're the MC, they try to ask the developer to account for human variability. The odds of being able to do that from like a mathematical standpoint or a scientific standpoint is illogical. You're calculating based on a range, a distribution, a mean, a mode, not any particular individual. So it is up to you with the successful problem-solving skills and whatnot, which is my mantra. Problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills are a premium skill. It goes a long way. It takes a long time to develop its foundations. However, it can serve you for the rest of your life, right? That type of thing. The stuff about sleep and cardio pretty much means different structures reinforce each other. Yeah. Yep. You came here for Bunpro and got forbidden molecular biology knowledge thing. All right. Yeah, early sociological methodology really stressed the average person does not exist, by the way, but people in undergrad under discuss this core mind. Yes, exactly. Interesting. So does that mean, are you a graduate? Did you are you bachelor's, or are you pursuing a doctorate? Are you postgraduate? Interesting. You mentioned something about undergrad discussion. Usually the term undergrad doesn't come up if you're not a graduate already. So I imagine then you must have at minimum a bachelor's. Usually not too many, like that's a term that is very, very specific to a postgraduate. You're really invested in pursuing a PhD in finite time? Ah, I see, I see. May I ask what type of PhD you're interested in? Like, because a PhD has to do this. Eventually, you're gonna have to present a thesis, right? A thesis on whatever you're interested in. My thesis was technically had nothing to do with this. My thesis was virology. I studied retrovirology, um, specifically like mutagenesis, and however, like most of the stuff you talk about, like a PhD really means this, where you hypothesize and theorize and enter like internal monologues about integrating information and stuff. So that is like one of the natural habits that often form when you pursue a PhD in something. You almost finished a bachelor's of science, pure math, and a bachelor's of bachelor of science, pure math, and bachelor of sociology. Intriguing. So there's still a master's to be done, but yeah. In math and sociology, I don't know how it works. Do you have to, or do you go to a PhD and in a honorary master's program, or do you have to take the master's and then use that as a prerequisite for a PhD? So, and I don't know where you're from, so that might be a different structure too. In the United States, or at least for the sciences, like the biological sciences, you enter a PhD program with a bachelor's, and it's the PhD program accounts for honorary masters. So like the master's and the PhD program are inclusive of each other. And it is through the process of the PhD program where you may decide that you do not want to pursue a PhD program, but still qualified for a master's degree in a sense. So like it's grouped together in at least the biological sciences, where when you enter a PhD program, you are entering to get the master's and the PhD in the same program. When you said there still be a master's to be done, that's interesting. Pure math. I don't even know what it's like to converse with a pure math person. Oh yeah, you're from Poland. Oh hey, you're maybe the third Polish person I've met. I knew a Polish person by chance for a while when I was playing Neverwinter online. This person really know their Taekwondo. So it's different from use undergrad to account for the different contexts, I guess. Oh, I see. Fair enough. Yeah, undergrad is any bachelor's, and then post undergrad is graduate. So anything after graduate is a master's degree or a PhD. Graduate school tend to be like you're going for a PhD and that's it. And master's is like on the way. Now for science specifically, there are other fields that master's is where you stop because there's really not too much theorizing and conceptualizing, or like for example masters in business, like a business and MBA. sure, I guess you can still do theory and conceptual understanding and testing for business practices. The question is to be asked is, are there any more things to be theorizing about, like testing and dogmatic challenges and reformation, and any area that any discipline that doesn't have a necessary incentive for like dogmatic changes or paradigm shifts or areas of active investigation typically do not have an incentive for a PhD program. So business would be one of them. And then obviously there's also application separation, like medical school, pharmacology school. Those are separate by their application. So a PhD does not overlap with application, which medical school deals with medicine, the application of medicine, not the conceptual investigation of medicine, and then pharmacology as well. And then masters of business is one of those things that have a lower threshold of entry. It's more spurious, so it's not standardized. So masters is where it cuts off. There's no like a professional medical school equivalent to business, because business is spurious in its conceptual understanding, while medical school has a standardization that goes beyond the undergrad level. So that's kind of how I often argue or rationalize whether it's not more so about how elite it is, but more so if there's an application. You passed in International Molecular National Molecular Bio Research Institute, and would really like to get a basic understanding at some point. It's really cool you do that. Oh, yeah, so what got me away from research? COVID. COVID, and if I had to be like super quick about this, COVID and lifestyle choices. So my postdoctoral period was right during COVID. So it ended during COVID. And then I took that time off, right? The COVID thing, stay in line. However, I took it off not because necessarily of COVID. COVID was part of the conditional obligation. I took off because I was burned out. And it wasn't burned out due to dissatisfaction. It was burned out because I had lifestyle sustainability problems. And that's the stuff that I talk about on a daily basis. It's not uncommon for someone to heavily focus on problem solving a specific thing as their narrative because they themselves struggle with that problem. So typically I overworked myself and I focus on things that are not sustainable. Like my health was not sustainable. As I was getting older, things were not scaling well. So I didn't burn out because I really hated the thing. Like, for example, it's different from the internet burnout, which is where you like something so much that you worked on it so much it's no longer interesting. That's a different symptom of burning out. That's like complacency burning out. I burned out for what you might have heard on the like successful content creator thing. Like I want to do it so much that it was at the cost of my health. So you probably heard those things before from like content creators where they're like, I would really love to do this. It's bigger and better, but the pressure the pressure keeps getting bigger and bigger. And eventually, hey guys, I got to step away for 5 years or 6 years, and maybe I'll come back, or maybe I'll never come back. That's the same burnout. And maybe it's a possibility. I don't necessarily think I need science or research. I do research now hypothetically. So like not the same as internet research. I love to create social experiments. I would love to write a book very soon about things that I would do in independent research situation. And you see happy if it's better now. It is most certainly better now. Obviously, would I have solved the burnout issue despite COVID? Maybe. No worse than academia, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, academia is anywhere. The nice thing, what I typically say is when someone asks me, so like you have a PhD, right? I get this occasionally. When someone reads my name and they ask. But most of the time, I would say this is irregular because we don't bring up PhD often. Like in my 7 years, PhD gets brought up, like the idea of education and PhD and qualifications get brought up like 2% of the time. So this would be one of those times. Despite talking to like 80% university students, they rarely ever notice about the discussion of graduate school. So in terms of PhD, someone often asks me like, so what do you think? What is a PhD? What are the tips or recommendations, or what does PhD mean, right? I answer this question pretty much consistently. PhD is that when you go through the process of getting a PhD, the world becomes your research platform. Like the things that have to make it possible for you to defend a thesis and dissertation and tell yourself you want to do it for the rest of your life is the idea of the basis of what I'm talking about in language learning. You bring the interest. Rarely does anything ever like overcome deter you from your curiosity and inquisition in personal pursuit of like clarity and knowledge, and that journey never ends either. Once you aim to provide some clarity, association, and research, it leads to a disproportionately increase in questions. So like that is the philosophy. Like that is what a PhD will get you in terms of like the behavioral aspect. When you study something, anything can be studied. You are looking for problems. You are looking for weirdness, oddities. Everything is inherently within your control to be interested in it. It requires that observational interest and diligence in order to want to pursue a higher degree in academics. So when it comes to this, if you're like sitting here like, oh, I could never be this interested in Bunpro, like probably not. You probably wouldn't be that interested in a PhD either, because when you're thinking about what you're going to write your thesis on, it's probably going to be like 5 to 7 years dedicated to possibly what you feel like the most interesting minutia nuance of a particular phenomenon of a subset of various particular conditions, only to discover something and have an exponential more questions to answer down the road. And then what you tell yourself is, man, boy, is it great to be a human being who can spend their entire lifetime with endless interesting questions to investigate. So that to me is the embodiment of someone. If you're asking yourself like, what are your pursuits? If you want a PhD in something, I hope that whatever you're pursuing a PhD in, that is the same, in my opinion, a very same and fundamental concept of asking yourself, are you interested? Because otherwise, if you're someone that sits there and say, I can't wait till someone makes something interesting for me to consume, that is like the opposite of a PhD. That's application. So Like, you only do things when it's appropriate. You only do things when you want to, or like when someone needs you to. You only do things when things are demanded of you. Otherwise, you are there to wait for someone. When you wait for someone to provide the interest for you. That is usually not the case for someone who wants a PhD. Everything is interesting. I think the most depressing thing to a PhD, like a prospective scholar, is how limited time they have. Like that, and resources and limited time. If you want to know like an undertone of what else took me away from research, resources. Because if you're ever interested in nearly everything you touch and everything you see, one of the biggest lingering bottlenecks are resources, money, and what's the other resource? Time, money, and then tangentially related to time, your own health. So your longevity and your health is the cost of your undefined infinite curiosity in the thing you're trying to pursue, because that's what consistently rears its head. Like, hey, I really want to, like, instead of taking a simplified, optimized contingency plan on this experimental method, I wish I could just do all of it and not complain about resources, right? Like, hey, I ran outside today and I looked at this tree, and this tree did a really weird thing. If only someone could give me like $5 million to do this weird oddity that I'm curious about, and then really get to the truth of the things, only to realize that I'm only going to end up having more questions at the end of this $5 million investment. That is the pure essence of academia, right? It's not sustainable. Arguably, like, it's unapologetically not sustainable. So you do have to reel it back in and think about investments, like how to get funding, and know the social environment cues, what the applications are, and a bit of pandering and trying to sell, right? Try to sell yourself to the highest bidder so that you can answer their questions, but hopefully they give you enough wiggle room to answer your own questions, right? And then also there's the really real world consequences, how your research is going to be used. And I'm not going to use the obvious one, in history. We'll use the current one that's topical. AI. Well, right? For everything that is interesting about the research potential of AI and the theoretical consequences, and like my mind is exploding with ideas. Like, I wouldn't mind going back into like seeking a PhD in like the computer sciences at this point, exploring the ramifications of human relational aspects and behavioral conditioning through its communication with an interface that's presenting itself as a personification of human interaction, like, a supplant of human interaction. Maybe like a PhD in psychology at the interface of computer science or something. But no one's asking, like, when you think about where the money is, that's not where the money is. The money is not concerned about the potential consequences and like diminish critical thinking skills and problem solving skills at the interface of using LLMs and the perception of wisdom through pattern recognition and data harvesting. That is not what most people are interested in. And that's technically what I've been talking about when I'm language learning and playing video games and stuff. The subtextual thing that's topical right now is the consequences of interacting with data-driven procedural models as an substitution, practically a substitution for human interaction. So that would be a great thesis. It would be an awesome thesis. It would take many years. It will probably be nearly impossible, highly improbable, because it's a tour de force, because AI generation and interaction, it's changing so rapidly. So how do you create an experimental design to account for that? That type of thing, fantastic. So if anyone out there that will eventually publish a PhD about this, that's awesome. I'm there to read it. That's probably a good example, something a little bit more topical. The other example I was going to use was Manhattan Project, World War II, atomic bombs, right? Despite the nobility of academia and self-interest and stuff, it can be applied, right? It can be applied. It has different applications. So those are all the conundrums that can stop the flawed ambitions of enthusiastic scholars. And then there are others you can talk about, like the hyper-focusedness of dehumanizing people as test subjects. And they're like, if you read enough science fiction, you can probably use your imagination on what happens when you have someone who has uncontrollable curiosity. Uncontrollable curiosity is something more of an idealism to a fault, and science has those balances. Like, you can't simply go and do whatever you want. There are checks and balances, at least. Resources interfere with interests, so everything falls apart. Yeah, pretty much. Your body, it's either your body, your mental state, or something else, something external. Resources is typically the one. Yeah, and you could be doing stuff like tweaking UX so that people may never turn their phones off again. Yep. But man, this would be the most depressing career. Yeah. Optimizing for attention. The attention work, like the studying on behavioral consequences of the behavioral consequences, the unintentional, the consequences of hyper optimizing algorithm or like data driven type of form of engagement is a really thriving field. So if you are into maybe psychology, right? You mentioned psychology, and mathematics does play a role. Mathematics is an application in sociology, and branch it to like psychology. Psychology can be an application of studying the impact of the patterns that are associated with like human behavior when it comes to exposure or chronic exposure to the unintentional, maybe the unintentional efficacy of business practices right now on retaining user attention, right? I still like to believe that it was an unintended consequence, like the pursuit of business practices, optimizing cost and making profit, created in unintentional, non-malicious intent, sub-consequence of creating this new psychosis issue. And that is what I talk about most of the time now. Like, it's hard to not talk about the elephant in the room when you're thinking about language learning, right? Because language learning is a conditional thing. It's a environmentally, almost voluntarily self-imposed conditional habit that you're having. It's not that dissimilar from the basis of psychology, behavioral psychology specifically. Those theories and concepts still, they're still fairly solid, and they're observed very vigorously in this day and age due to AI. Thankfully got into an internship about AI psychosis. I'm not surprised. I would love to hear your stuff in the future, with confidentiality and discreetness, of course. Still different from critical work in sociology, but at least gives room for the application of both majors. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. Sorry, I wasn't reading it. Sometimes I just keep talking and I would eventually catch up. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the point. It's a great opportunity to interface between your aspect of your pure math and sociology, and you can even branch multiple. Most theses nowadays are interdisciplinary, because it's very rare that when you look at a thesis and you're like, I'm just going to do this one discipline. That's rarely ever the case. Like, I have a PhD in biology, but it's molecular biology, cell biology, biochemistry, oncology, some poultry stuff, chickens, and retrovirology. Like, it's rarely ever one thing. And then the last thing that I really ended up doing that is kind of tangentially related to the AI boon is I use computational bioinformatics. I relied on computational things like screening genetic mutations in a like million-fold screening process requires computational power. It requires compute. Actually, the basis of, during my time, keep in mind this is over 10 years ago, or close to 10 years ago, at that time, that same level of compute was being used experimentally. So it wasn't like available through like your browser interface or something like that. But we still use data centers, to screen for like millions of computational reads to create correlations on things. And LLMs is an application of that using language, like specific language occurrences by sorting them through vectors, right? You create vectors of occurrences, map them out, and then the LLM projects the frequency of words that are associated with each other at different times, and you create a three-dimensional model of that over time, or storage, like storage and memory, and you create that LLM, the aspect of feeling like they're constructing sentences. But it's not the idea of the meanings that are associated to each other, it's the frequency in which they are distributed and associated with each other. That's how LLMs, in my opinion, work. They're not like the word interesting is like the nuance of being curious about something. That's not how the LLM is processing that. It's how often is the word interesting associated in the context that it is being used by data. So it sounds like oftentimes ChatGPT is like creating this semblance of cognition, but it's looking at frequency. Like, how often are these statements put together? How often these words are put together? How often is A next to B multiplied and scaled up to a billion times over? It's not that, oh, they feel that blue is cold. Blue is cold is a common thing that happens in art theory or, like color theory. Blue is a cold color. It's a cool color. So that frequency, the idea of those things expressed together, those words expressed together, is how an LLM determines that. That concept is used to map genetic mutations, especially genetic mutations on the order of magnitude of millions and billions within a single organism. And then you multiply that single organism, that single case study, to like 30 controlled studies. Then you have 30 times a billion. So screening process and looking at that type of thing manually would be inhumanly, it would be not possible. So when investigating these things, I coincidentally have already understand some of the conceptual models and basis for things like, again, this is the foundations and conceptual models. We're not even talking about the complexity of creating all these rules and then having emergent problems. Right now, AI is a study of emergent problems. Emergence happens very frequently when you're exploring something. You thought you knew how things work, you combine them, and they created an emergent problem. And now it's retroactively a science, which is really funny because there was a time when technology was built in a way that it is predictable, right? And now, because of the accelerated, arguably indirect pursuit of other business practices and applications, they are able to create an emergent problem in it due to the accelerated expansion into an area without due diligence and oversight. So now we're retroactively created a new entity or a new area in which science, it's now an observable science. So like, for example, how do you solve the AI hallucination problem, right? How do you solve it? How do you solve the hallucination of AI? Well, I can tell you Anthropic is not doing very hot on that department. Especially when it comes to the safety guards with interacting with human users, right? Like another topical thing, Anthropic and their attempt to try to think that they understand an emergent problem without controlled studies, like without controlling the aspect. So they constantly release like prototypes and constantly release structural guardrails that they think is built on a controlled environment that they tested, but then they release it into human interaction, and a human interaction produces an emergent problem, which that is the essence of biology. Like I originally went into like chemistry and biochemistry, and that had more of a quantitative, predictable aspect, like pure math, for example. Pure math is elegant. It's incredible because it's so systemically consistent. When you enter, like when you start going into application, like human application stuff, sometimes the purity of like mathematics and stuff have not reached, like I'm gonna put in quotes because there's arguments about this stuff, have reached a level to explain the emergence of stuff yet. I might not live long enough to see the mathematical emergence of explaining why a LLM persistently creates hallucinations. Like, but hear me out. For me, it is such a great way to spend a lifetime investigating that as a thesis in computer science. Like, that would be such a fun thing. I do know someone who is pursuing that, by the way. It's a person from the UK, and we talk maybe like once a month, try to catch up. He's looking at, like, he's forming all of his foundational works on studying how to observe, supersede, like engineer machine learning, right? Machine learning AI, like from an academic standpoint. So they're like constructing answers, questions, prompts, and seeing how that works. It's so interesting. It's insane how quickly bioinformatics killed so much of the work on the intersection of math and biology. Oh yeah, they most certainly did. It is so, like, the first time I saw what an R package or data consumption was, I was shocked at not only how few people are involved in doing all the data analyses, it demonstrated to me how little I knew. Like, I see this number, right? It comes out and it tells me these things, like, I don't know how to explain how that worked. Like, since my background is not in mathematics or computer science or any form of that, I tried to take some programming languages and stuff to like compensate for the manipulation of the data, the high throughput data. But when I look at the mathematical parameters that was constructed by the theoretical model proposed by someone else, you know, like their R package and whatnot, and I execute it, I see these numbers and I only can interpretively demonstrate how it fits my use case. But there's no way when something odd shows up, I'm like, I have no idea what that's doing. That is the current state of the excessive speed that AI or large language models have been accelerating at. It's accelerating to the point where I'm not even sure if trying to trust a model like that to the extent that it's trying to present is going to create a reliable source of consistent progress, because it can very well create emergent problems that would catastrophically destroy infrastructure. Like, for example, bioinformatics, my concern was I have no idea the nature of explaining the data that I have. Like, okay, this is telling me that these are the permutations and these are the rare cases, here's the frequency. It's like, I get that, but is it doing it? Is it correct? Is it doing what I think it's doing? I am unsure. It was the most concerning thing that I had when I was preparing the rest of the thesis, like analyzing the data. Like, I don't know. You know, like when I say, oh, well, this is particularly statistically significant, and I'm like, well, that's what the program pumped out, but I can't validate that. So I would have to ask an expert on how to do that, right? How to do that. How do you check sufficiently enough in different mathematical ways? Like, you have to mathematically be skilled enough to be able to quality check, QC the potential algorithm, the potential script or machine learning process that you have in order to validate its quality control. It's not unlike humans, right? Like, if you ask me, Mark, what are my opinions about Bunpro? You would have to, if you wanted to trust me 100%, you would have to have the skills, the problem-solving skills and the critical thinking skills to QC and vet the relevance of my experience before accepting the advice, or demonstrate a level of empathy. Like, if I need to demonstrate a level of resonance or empathy with you in order to find any of the information relevant or important. Now, if we take that handshake and rapport and then think about AI models right now. So when you go to your car and it is using an AI model to get you safely from point A to point B, how do you handshake? And that is one of the major study areas that I would probably, in my opinion, if I was like 30 years younger or something, I would pursue. I would go into computer science and I would pursue how to create all the quality challenges and the litmus tests to QCing the judgment of any particular model at the interface of a human user and an AI model, because that would be ever curious. It's a sociological, psychological problem that may occur. It would be an emergent problem. And all of those symptoms are occurring right now due to the rapid expansion and application of a technology without due diligence in associating with how humans can throw a wrench in everything. And the irony here is AI models are built on human data. So why when someone says it's very surprising that AI models hallucinate? Like, well, I mean, if you really want an AI model to do everything human does, one of them is hallucination. We started this, let's take it around full circle. What is hallucination when framed in the human condition? Memory loss and memory consolidation over time. Humans hallucinate by filling in details, but it's not called a hallucination. It's called a natural process. The natural process is that when you recall a piece of memory, neurologically, you are reconstructing it every single time you recall it. You are not taking an image and then you take that same image and look at the same image. You are reproducing the memory again. That's a closer biological representation of what's happening when you're recalling a memory. You are constructing the memory again. So every time you live, every moment that passes, every new experience you have, the chances of other memories cooperating with the existing memory when you constructively recall another memory, it works both to your advantage and your disadvantage. That is the nature of human civilization. Why written technology, photography, all of the record keeping and stuff is not a substitute for what humans can do, and humans cannot substitute their capacity to do something by relying solely on that. The human magic is both its bane, its drawback, and its advantage. Hallucination is inspiration. Like that, they're one in the same. They're connected with each other. If you took a human's capacity if you reduce the human capacity to have consolidation, right? The way memory works now, if you took it and give a human eidetic memory, what do you think a human is going to behave like if they don't consolidate any of their memories? Well, if they have trauma, they'll always experience that trauma over and over again, forever, for the rest of their life. How long do you think a human being will live by having to consistently experience their trauma? I mean, it's not the social norm. You can maybe cite some case studies. Habitually, people who have incredibly strong eidetic memories struggle with different types of normalization and balance because the social conditioning is not presented to cater to humans who belong outside the outlier. So then you have AI and you start thinking, man, we're so surprised that AI starts creating perceived levels, like a perception level, not them being conscious, but perception level of self-preservation, laziness, lying, over-emphatic sycophants, right? Like very flattery language, right? Hyper-objectivity, sharp Occam's razor preference to like human problems. Yeah, humans do that when you provide the same the same conditional restrictions. Like, how do you solve, like, for example, I'm going to use a modest proposal, a reference to modest proposal. How do you solve human hunger? Eat babies. It solves so many problems. It reduces population growth. Humans produce babies. You can regulate and ration babies. And it reduces the food load on the world. So all of that stuff, and you're wondering, Anthropic is struggling with an AI model suggesting very particular behaviors that may endanger youth to self-harm. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not surprised. The thing is, it's kind of concerning that it is surprising to the people who are in charge of those products. So like the individuals who are calling those shots, as in the people who are implementing and obligating and controlling those devices, they find it not surprising, or they find it trivial that it's happening. That is the true concern here. Like, we're not necessarily talking about inherently bad people. We're talking about people who are focused on specific tasks that do not have the due diligence and oversight of other people. And then it goes back to your last statement, Mark, about collab is the only way to go, I guess. Yeah, if only things like the AI technology are actually collaborating with other disciplines. That is the that is the scary part, because it's really well accepted topically that a lot of these businesses are an echo chamber. They are a self-feeding echo chamber. So there's no collaboration happening. It's everyone plays the same game. So that's one of the human aspects. Human echo chambers are an example of anti-academic oversight. When you have things that are over-discussed and under-discussed, you get an echo chamber. An echo chamber fulfills the quality of creating oversight because they are no longer open-minded enough to account for emergence or any other form of contingency. So that is wild. And to bring it back to language learning, like, do we have an example of language learning? Immersion all the time. All immersion all the time. That would be a great echo chamber study, case study in language learning, where you have a consistent environment where people can over discuss and hyper focus on specific like hacks and all or none approaches without considering any form of trade-off, because they would under discuss, squelch, and undermine any opposing theories. And when you step back and look at the collective data and the collaborative academic study on language learning, the answer is, shockingly, for humans, a balanced approach. Who would have thought understanding even the philosophy of the human condition can support the idea that, oh, hey, a balanced approach is what humans do, because humans are not robots. And that's crazy. I mean, that's I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have any influence. By the way, I have no investment in any of these. I want to make a disclaimer for future me and all the other people who I'm not affiliated with anything. I'm basically a unemployed. I'm a voluntarily unemployed, permanent sabbatical, curious former academic researcher. That's it. Like, that's all I got, and I enjoy brainstorming on these things. Maybe one day in the future, I would love to be able to interview. I would love to be able to interview people who are experts at these, because boy howdy do I have so many burning questions. And what I mean by experts, I mean experts who are interested in the study of these things, not solely for their motivational application, more so the curiosity of what could be. Because while I'm very terrible at mathematics, it's so interesting to entertain the idea that all of this, psychology, biology, neurobiology, molecular biology, has some semblance of elegant discipline, right? Much like mathematics. There's a great chance that there is a nearly definite chance that I won't live long enough to see the elegance of mathematics meets the emergent chaos that is natural human interactions with anything, be it AI, be it, like, when you think you have an elegant system and you throw it into a mass of humans, there's still not, in my opinion, in my lifetime, going to be enough compute power to account for human emergence when it comes to that. At least in my opinion. For now, I don't think I will live long enough. It would be really fun to see the next 20 or 30 years, though. I think I have a solid 20 or 30 years of good health to see how crazy it's gonna get when humans like collide with the perpetual entropy machine that is humans, collide with what people are considering as perfectly calculating, data-driven models. Like humans, I like it because we study natural languages, right? It's not like we communicate with conlangs. Humans don't use constructive languages to communicate. Like most of the time, they use natural languages, and that's one of those things. Like, do you think it's possible to create a constructed language in which it is a universal language? Well, I mean, someone tried for a very long time. So it'll be interesting if AI is that answer. It's like, what if Anthropic or like OpenAI or the future monopoly that is SpaceX, Anthropic, AI conglomerate, Musk, multi-billion trillion dollar company would try to unify the way people behave and talk to each other by funneling all forms of communication through a master conduit. It could happen. I mean, that is possible within my lifetime. So I could imagine some attempt like that in the next 2 decades. Or it could just catastrophically just fall apart. Who knows? I get what you say. It would be so great to know everything from the axiom up. Yeah, I know, right? Across many disciplines, but you have to get your work done anyways, yeah. And you want to be this sort of linking person between disciplines. You really decide to be not the great in all of them. Exactly. I am a generalist. So multidisciplinary was necessary. Like, to be multidisciplinary was necessary for me to like reach a particular threshold of understanding. So for me, I've always thought of it as this. You pick, 1 to 3 that you might be able to specialize in, and then your bottleneck dictates how wide your skill level is overall. So I would say there are particular things, 1 or 3 things that can be highlighted that I probably excel at. However, for every one of these, there are at least like 3 times that in skills that account for a bottleneck, like a bottom line. So it's one of those, like, despite you having a really strong threshold in one or 2 of the skills, you still have to make sure that all your other skills cross this threshold. And this threshold is like your resources. Oftentimes is restricted by your resources. So for example, it doesn't matter how well you specialize. If you do not reach a particular sleep hygiene, you're kind of screwed. Like, sleep hygiene can deteriorate any element of whatever your skills are. So there are so many foundational resources that are right in your face all the time, and they do demand your time that would take away from your specialization. And for a temporary time, when you're in your 20s, right? When you're in your 20s, you might be able to neglect sleep, diet, mental health. I did that. That's what I mean. Like, I have a very personal relationship with this. You can sacrifice your sleep, diet, mental, for maybe a couple good years, I would say. Some pretty solid 20s for like even higher return on these skills. Meanwhile, all of those other skills start to dip below a threshold. And when they dip below a threshold, at some point, all of this area here ends up eroding all of your specialized skills. So nowadays, I take an integrated approach. It's kind of one of the mantras of my science program. The science program that I was in, one of the take-home messages was, try to focus on your thing, but find your application in others. So that's now we're going to wrap the whole Bunpro thing around. When you specialize in something, you want to take that specialization and form it as the foundation of other disciplines. That is what I would refer to as the interdisciplinary approach. So you take your foundation would be your specialized skill. And in this case, in language learning, it would be your native language. You take your native language and make it and form it the foundation of your things. So in language, you could say, well, for Japanese, it's character studies, then words, and sentences. You can allocate it in a different way, right? So anyway, and then what happens is you have to form the associations between those disciplines. All the while, your specialized skill is being reinforced by exploring these interdisciplinary relationships. So you can break these up into that structure at any time, in my opinion. So if you know English, then English forms your foundation. It's your specialized skill. You already know your native language, like let's just say instead of English, your native language. Take your native language in order to create your foundations of your other disciplines. Then you form the relationships between them. You never give up your specialization. Your specialization must be maintained in them. That is the idea. This is a layman's point of view, but from an abstract, I saw what characterizes human math is compressibility. I'm curious if what you said about elegant MLMs and LLMs result possibly appearing is their innate property. Me too. That's what I've been trying to read up on, actually. There hasn't been enough descriptive and publicly available, by the way. Here's one of the problems about reading LLMs. Business propriety. Business proprietary or propriety. That type of data would not be disclosed due to business interests. Right? Because we're not LLMs, we're not talking about academia anymore. I mean, even academia has some proprietary privilege. You know, you still have privilege until it's published, right? So academia has that, at least that disclosure. I am genuinely curious of what that thing you're talking about, the human math is compressibility, and then looking at its relationship about the elegant LLM results, right? And their properties. The unfortunate resource problem is, even if you want to, you would have to be in a position of privilege. And I wanted to make the disclaimer that I'm not affiliated with any of these people, nor am I affiliated with Bunpro or I don't have any like affiliations. So that creates all of the problems. But if you ever find anything and you can discreetly talk about these things, I would love to hear, because I talk to Procause, the other guy. I talk to him all the time, like, oh, what did you learn about AI this time? Like, if you ever become a professional and become a super awesome guy like Mark, like if you go on to defend your thesis and stuff, I would be genuinely privileged to hear some of that stuff in discretion, right? There are so many students right now that I know, they're all going off to university. The next like 3 or 4 years is huge for all of these people. They're the future. And just to keep in mind, I'm in my 40s. I'm like going through my middle age period soon. Like I'm 39 and I'm gonna be 40 next. I'm doing like memoirs and like retrospection and stuff, but I love seeing young passionate people still pursue education. So I really appreciate your company today. Anyway, thanks for all the insight. Gotta sleep soon, but you joined the Discord under a nickname. Okay, sure thing. It's just a string of characters that happens to mean a strong value in... Oh, interesting. Thanks for explaining that. You're gonna have to explain to me a little bit more. Yeah. a lot of introspection on my side. Yeah, like I'm not creating things anymore too much, so I want to hear what other people create. Like one day, it's really romantic, but one day I want to share your story with other people. I'm a collector of stories now. Like if you wanted to hear about someone else's story, value is super random. Oh, okay. Yes. A whole value in, yes. Value in Polish. We'll have to talk more. There are a few people in the Discord that talk about their thing. Someone's making adult, like a family cartoon. I love talking about that stuff. People who create, sign me up. I'm willing to share your story because of our exchange. So sleep well. Thanks for hanging out. I'm glad we can reconcile, because I really did feel a little bit weird about yesterday's timing. So I'm so glad that we had this chance serendipitous encounter or follow up. Now we can sleep with even more preponderance. All right, I'll let you sleep well, rest. Okay, folks. With that out of the mind, right? What a wonderful... I'm... Serendipity serves again. Yeah, got the yesterday's answer? Yeah. Alright. I'll keep in touch, right? Keep in touch. There's more. Discord is free. Like you can talk about your preponderance all you want. Like if you scroll through Discord, I'm the one who types the wall of text. So feel free to type your own wall of text if you want. That's largely what the Discord is for. Okay, folks. With that said, Bunpro serves, right? Serves as our topic. It's not very uncommon to find intellectually interesting people when you're constantly engaged in the interest of learning. So I hope people find this a point of inspiration for others to engage in human interaction when it comes to acquiring skills. That's a wrap for Bunpro. If you're gonna watch this later, arigatou gozaimasu. As always, feel free to follow along, pick up Bunpro for yourself, give it a go. Exchange, discuss, keep each other motivated, right? So until next time, 皆さんまたね。見てくれてありがとう. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. I'm gonna get up, stretch, walk around, and I'll be back for Hansa here. Thank you.